Hello, my friends. Welcome to Night Owl Dream Stories. I'm your host, Ethan. Tonight we journey to a place where the ocean breathes in rhythm with the cosmos, where ancient Polynesians didn't just sail across the Pacific. They conversed with it, reading its moods like you'd scroll through your phone's weather app, except infinitely more reliable and with zero ads. You're about to discover navigation secrets so sophisticated that modern sailors still can't quite explain how double-hulled canoes found specks of land across 2 million square miles of open water without a single GPS satellite. Fair warning, you probably won't survive hearing about the deep-sea training rituals where apprentice navigators were tied to canoes and dragged through pitch-black waters until they could feel cardinal directions through their skin. But hey, at least you're cozy in bed right now. If you genuinely enjoy my stories, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a beach that exists in the space between history and memory, somewhere in the scattered emerald fragments of Polynesia around 800 CE. The sand beneath your bare feet isn't quite solid. It shifts with a quality that feels more liquid than granular, as if the boundary between land and sea has always been negotiable here. Above you, the sky unfurls in a tapestry so dense with stars that the darkness itself seems like the minority, small pockets of void between the overwhelming light. But these aren't just pretty dots to the people moving around you. They're a language, a map, a clock, and a cultural encyclopedia, all compressed into flickering photons that have traveled unfathomable distances to meet your upturned gaze. The air tastes of salt and night-blooming flowers, Tyre, their white petals luminous even in starlight, releasing a perfume so sweet it almost hurts. You can hear the ocean, but not as a single sound. It's a symphony. The bass rumble of distant swells breaking on outer reefs, the middle register of waves folding onto the beach, the treble hiss of foam dissolving into sand, and underneath it all, a subsonic pulse you feel more than hear, the heartbeat of something vast and ancient and impossibly patient. A hand touches your shoulder, and you turn to find an old man whose face carries the carved history of 70 years under the Pacific sun. His skin is the color of koa wood, decorated with tattoos that flow across his shoulders and chest in patterns that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. Geometric waves, stylized fishhooks, rows of triangular shark teeth, each mark a story, a navigation lesson, a genealogy compressed into living ink. You hear it, he asks, his voice rough as coral. The ocean is speaking. Always speaking. Most people just forgot how to listen. His name is Kainoa, though names feel almost inadequate for someone who carries this much quiet authority. He's a master navigator, a PWO in the ancient tradition, and tonight he's preparing for a voyage that will take his crew across 1,200 miles of open ocean to an island they've never seen, using tools that would fit in a small basket. A few gourds of water, some dried fish, and several thousand years of accumulated knowledge passed down through oral tradition, so precise that losing even a single chant could mean death for everyone aboard. Come, he says, gesturing toward a large double-hulled canoe pulled up on the beach. You want to understand how we found every island in this ocean. First, you must unlearn everything your culture taught you about being lost. The canoe is a masterpiece, 2 hulls carved from breadfruit tree trunks and lashed together with coconut fiber rope in patterns so complex they look like 3-dimensional puzzles. The platform between the hulls serves as deck space, and the mast, already stepped and waiting, rises toward the stars like a prayer made solid. The sail, woven from pandanus leaves, hangs furled and ready, whispering slightly in the night breeze. You climb aboard, settling onto the smooth wood still warm from the day's sun. Around you, crew members move with practiced efficiency, loading supplies, checking lashings, murmuring to each other in a language that sounds like the ocean itself learned to speak. Young and old work together, and you notice how the younger ones watch the elders, not just listening but absorbing, becoming living repositories for knowledge that cannot be written down because writing would kill it, flatten it, strip away the dimensional complexity that only exists in the space between teacher and student. Kainoa settles beside you, his gnarled fingers tracing patterns on the canoe's wooden platform. "First lesson," he says. "Where are we going?" You start to answer but realize you have no idea. Some island, somewhere out there in the dark. He smiles, reading your confusion. "Good. You're already more honest than most. We're sailing to Raiadia, 1,200 miles northwest. We've never been there. No one in this crew has seen it. But we'll arrive at its eastern shore in approximately 23 days, and we'll know we're within 50 miles of land a full day before we see it." "How?" you ask, and the question feels absurdly inadequate. "Because the ocean will tell us," he says simply. "Now lie down on your back and look up. Your first lesson isn't about sailing, it's about seeing." You recline on the platform, and the sky swallows your vision. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light, so bright you could almost imagine reaching up and trailing your fingers through it. The stars aren't twinkling, this far from any landmass, with no atmospheric disturbance. They shine steady and fierce, each one a fixed point in a celestial map that turns with perfect regularity around you. "That bright one," Kainoa says, pointing to a brilliant star hanging low on the horizon. "Hokule, Arcturus, your people call it. It passes directly over Hawaii. And that one Hokupa, your North Star, though it's not much use to us this far south. The Southern Cross down there, we call it Humu. And see that reddish one, Antares. Anamua, we say it stands at the front." He's naming them faster than you can track, his finger dancing across the sky, connecting invisible lines. But you start to notice something. These aren't random names, random stars. They're organized into houses, into paths, into a structured system that divides the sky into navigation sectors. Certain stars rise at certain times, setting at precise points on the horizon. By knowing which star house is overhead, a navigator can determine both position and direction even in complete darkness, hundreds of miles from any land. "We have 220 stars in our navigation system," Kainoa continues. "But really, we use more. The important ones, the ones that rise and set at cardinal points that pass over known islands, those we know like our children's faces. Every navigator memorizes them, their paths, their seasons, their relationships to each other. And between those stars, we learn the not stars too." "Not stars," you ask. "Planets. They wander. Mars, Venus, Jupiter, beautiful liars that look like stars but move through the houses, changing position night to night. A lazy navigator might mistake them for fixed points. A dead navigator, really, because that mistake will put you 300 miles off course, and out here, 300 miles off course means you sail past your destination into empty ocean until thirst kills you and the sharks get a free meal. Nature doesn't give participation trophies." Around you, the crew begins launching the canoe, pushing it down the sand into the gentle shore break. The hulls slide into the water with barely a splash, and suddenly you're afloat, the ocean's surface undulating beneath you like breathing, like you've been swallowed by something alive, and are now moving through its digestive system towards some unknown destination. It's not a comforting metaphor, but lying here under impossible stars with the coast of your departure already fading into darkness behind you, it feels accurate. The sail rises, catching wind you barely felt on shore, and the canoe begins moving, not racing but gliding with purpose, the hulls cutting through the water with a sound like scissors through silk. Kainoa remains beside you, but now he's looking down, his attention on the water rather than the sky. Second lesson, he says, the ocean is not empty, it's full of roads. You peer over the side, seeing only darkness punctuated by occasional flashes of bioluminescence where the hull disturbs the water. Microscopic organisms light up at the touch, creating trails of cold fire that fade within seconds. It's beautiful but seems random, meaningless. Watch, Kainoa instructs, and points to the water flowing past the starboard hull. See how the phosphorescence moves. Not random, it's following a current. These waters have structure, rivers within the ocean, invisible highways that connect islands like trade routes connected your ancient cities. We learned every current in our ocean, their seasonal changes, their depths, their moods. He's right. Once he points it out, you can see it. Subtle differences in how the water moves, variations in the bioluminescent patterns, changes in the way the waves form and break. The ocean isn't a uniform surface. It's textured, complex, readable to trained eyes the way a book is readable to someone who knows the language. And the waves, he continues, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality perfect for easing you towards sleep. Oh, the waves. They're the ocean's memory. Every wave that touches our hull began somewhere. A storm 1,000 miles away, wind dragging across water, energy transferred and traveling. Waves from different sources cross each other, combine, create interference patterns. If you know how to read them, you can feel the presence of land that's still below your horizon. He places your hand on the hull, and at first you feel only the vibration of movement, the rhythmic pulse of the canoe moving through water. But as you focus, other sensations emerge. There's a deeper vibration, slower, more irregular. And another, even subtler, like a bass note played so low it's almost subliminal. That deepest rhythm, Kainoa says, is from a distant storm 3 days sail south. The middle one is the primary swell pattern coming from the southeast, trade winds pushing water. And that highest frequency vibration, that's local chop wind waves from tonight's breeze. A master navigator can lie in the hull and read 6, 7 different wave patterns simultaneously, knowing which to follow, which to ignore, how their interference patterns will change as we approach land. Your mind struggles with this. It seems impossible, like trying to solve a differential equation in your head while someone recites poetry in a language you don't speak. And yet, around you, the crew moves with absolute confidence. No instruments, no compass, no sextant. Just human perception honed to supernatural precision through training that began in childhood and never stopped. The hardest part, Kainoa says, and you can hear the smile in his voice even in the darkness, is learning to trust your body over your mind. Your brain will lie to you. It will panic, insist you're lost, demand you turn back. But your skin, your inner ear, the water pressure against your fingers, the temperature differential between currents, these don't lie. The ocean tells the truth if you're humble enough to listen. The canoe continues cutting through the darkness, and you lose track of time. Could be an hour, could be 3. The stars wheel overhead with imperceptible slowness, their positions shifting in that eternal dance that has guided sailors since humans first looked up and wondered about those distant fires. Kainoa occasionally points out constellations, telling stories woven into their patterns, not Greek myths but Polynesian ones, tales of demigods and navigators, of islands pulled from the sea floor by magical fishhooks, of canoes that traveled between the world of the living and the dead. The moon, he says eventually, and you notice it's risen while you were entranced by stars, a waning crescent hanging low in the east, its incomplete disk still bright enough to cast shadows on the deck. We don't navigate by moon alone. She's too changeable, her path too complex, but she controls the ocean in ways you surface people never see. He explains how Polynesian navigators recognized 17 distinct phases of the moon, each with specific names, each associated with particular tide conditions, fishing prospects, planting schedules. The moon wasn't just a light in the sky, it was a calendar, a tide table, a fishing forecast, an agricultural guide, all compressed into one silvery sphere that waxed and waned with perfect regularity. When the moon is dark, Mahilani, we call one of those nights. The tides are smallest, laziest. Fish behave differently. The ocean is calmer. But when she's full, standing opposite the sun, the tides rise highest, currents run strongest, and if you're trying to enter a narrow channel through a reef, you'd better know exactly what you're doing or the ocean will dash your canoe to splinters while you watch. And we'll get to all of that later, the tide pools and the moon temples. But for now, just know she's part of our navigation system, one tool among many. You're getting drowsy now, lulled by the gentle motion, the rhythmic sound of water, the quiet voices of the crew murmuring in the background. Kainoa seems to sense this, his voice dropping lower, softer, becoming almost a lullaby. The navigators who trained me, he says, they had a final test. They'd take you out to deep water far from any land in complete darkness. No stars, clouds covered everything. Then they'd tie you to the hull, face down, and drag you through the water for hours. Just you and the ocean, moving through absolute blackness. You had to feel the currents against your skin, the temperature changes, the salinity differences where fresh water from distant rivers mixed with the sea. You had to let the ocean speak to your body in a language that bypassed your thinking mind entirely. He pauses, and you can hear the weight of memory in the silence. 3 boys took that test with me, he continues. 2 panicked, started screaming, had to be pulled up. The ocean rejected them, they couldn't surrender to it, couldn't stop their minds from fighting. They became fishermen instead. Good fishermen, honorable work, but they never became navigators. The 3rd boy and me, we lasted until dawn. When they pulled us up, we could point to our home island, 300 miles away, without seeing it. We'd felt it through the water. The ocean had accepted us, made us part of its system. That's what navigation is, not conquering the sea, but becoming fluent in its language. The story settles over you like a warm blanket. Around the canoe, the ocean continues its eternal conversation with itself. Waves overlapping, currents braiding, temperatures shifting, all creating a symphony of information that your conscious mind cannot process, but that somewhere deeper, some more ancient part of your brain might be starting to understand. And the clouds, Kainoa says, his voice now barely above a whisper, they're part of the system too. You see that patch of stationary clouds on the horizon, the ones that aren't moving with the wind. You focus where he's pointing, and yes, there's a small cluster of clouds that seem fixed in place while others drift past. And, he says simply, islands create their own weather. They heat differently than water, create updrafts, pull moisture from passing air masses. Those clouds are standing over an island we can't see yet, marking its position like a flag. In daytime, we watch for the color beneath clouds, greenish reflection from shallow lagoons, dark blue from deep channels. At sunset, we look for the glow of reflected light from white sand beaches painted on the underside of clouds. The sky shows us what the ocean hides. He continues describing the countless signs navigators read. Birds and their ranges. Some species never venture more than 20 miles from land. Others are useless indicators because they'll fly anywhere. Floating debris, pumice from distant volcanoes, creates trails and currents. The smell of land carrying on offshore breezes, experienced navigators could identify specific islands by scent alone. The particular combination of vegetation, volcanic soil, reef composition creating an olfactory fingerprint. Even the taste of the water. Salinity changes near large land masses. river outflows creating freshwater lenses that float on denser seawater. The catalog is overwhelming, but his voice has that quality that makes you stop trying to memorize and just let the information wash over you like the waves against the hull. Each detail is another thread in a tapestry so complex that no single person could hold it all, which is why the knowledge was distributed across generations, each elder specializing in certain star paths, certain current patterns, certain island approaches, the whole culture serving as a distributed navigation computer with redundancy built through oral repetition and ceremonial chanting. The chants, Kainoa says, and maybe he's reading your thoughts or maybe the trajectory of this education was always leading here. Everything I've told you, everything every navigator knows, it's all encoded in chants. Hundreds of them, some taking hours to recite fully. The chants don't just contain information. They structure it, make it memorable, tie it to rhythm and melody so it survives in human memory across centuries. He begins chanting softly, and even though you don't understand the words, you can hear the structure, the repetition with variation, the way certain phrases echo and build, the rhythmic pattern that would make it almost impossible to forget once properly learned. It sounds ancient, predating written language, coming from that era when human memory was the only hard drive available and cultures developed sophisticated mnemonic techniques that modern people, dependent on smartphones and search engines, have completely lost. The chant continues, and you're drifting now, consciousness ebbing like the tide. The stars above are wheeling, the ocean is breathing, the canoe is gliding through a darkness that doesn't feel threatening, but rather encompassing, like you've returned to the womb of the world and are being carried towards some destination that existed before you were born and will exist after you're gone. There's a reason, Kainoa says, his voice now seeming to come from very far away, that we call the ocean our pathway. It's not an obstacle. It's not something to conquer or survive. It's the medium through which we move, the element that connects rather than divides. Every island in this vast Pacific, from New Zealand to Hawaii to Rapa Nui, we found them all, settled them all, created trade networks spanning millions of square miles, all without your metals, your compasses, your mathematics. We had something better. We had relationship. We became part of the ocean system rather than fighting against it. The canoe rocks gently, and you're almost asleep now. That borderland state where the narrative world and dream world begin to merge. Kainoa's voice continues, softer still, describing the deep water training where apprentices learn to identify fish by the feel of their wake, where they practiced navigating underwater to understand how currents change with depth, where they were taught to read the stars' reflection on the water's surface as reliably as looking directly at the sky. And the dolphins, he murmurs, they taught us too. We watched how they navigate, how they sense pressure changes, how they communicate across vast distances. We learned to trust our instincts the way they trust theirs. The ocean is full of teachers if you're willing to be a student. The crew is silent now, or maybe you just can't hear them anymore over the sound of water and wind, and your own breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the waves. The stars have multiplied somehow, or perhaps your eyes have adjusted enough to see the fainter ones, so many that they seem to touch each other, a dome of light with only small patches of darkness in between. Kainoa is still talking, but his words are dissolving into pure sound, meaning giving way to rhythm, his voice becoming just another instrument in the ocean's symphony. Something about navigation being meditation, about long voyages inducing trance states where the distinction between navigator and ocean blur, where you stop thinking about direction and simply become direction, embodying the path rather than following it. The moon has climbed higher, its partial face now reflected in the water, creating a broken path of silver light that stretches from the canoe toward the horizon, another road among many. And on that thought, roads in the ocean, pathways of water and light and current and wave, the whole Pacific mapped not on paper but in the collective memory of navigators who were part human, part ocean, part sky. You drift deeper, the canoe carrying you through darkness toward an island you've never seen but that Kainoa knows is there, has always been there, waiting. The last thing you're aware of before sleep takes you completely is his hand on your shoulder, solid and warm, and his voice, now barely audible, saying something that might be a blessing or a navigation instruction or both. Trust the ocean, trust your body, trust the ancestors who learned this path. You're not lost. You were never lost. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, moving exactly as you should move, and the dawn will find you closer to your destination than you can possibly imagine. And then there's only the rocking, the water sounds, the warmth of the wood beneath you, and the infinite patience of the ocean carrying you deeper into the night, into the story, into the dream of navigation before numbers, before charts, before the world decided that knowing your position required anything more than paying attention to the voice of the sea. You sleep, and while you sleep, the canoe continues its journey. The stars wheel overhead, indifferent to your consciousness, their light reaching down through millions of miles of space to touch your closed eyelids. The crew makes small adjustments to the sail, reads the waves, checks their heading against the star compass etched invisibly across the sky. And Kainoa sits in the stern, one hand on the steering oar, feeling the ocean's pulse through the wood, listening to its whispered directions, embodying thousands of years of accumulated wisdom that exists nowhere but in moments like this. A craft moving across water, a human mind in conversation with the elements, knowledge that can be destroyed in a single generation if the chain of teaching breaks, but that preserved, represents one of humanity's greatest achievements. Learning to move through the world by becoming part of it rather than conquering it. The night deepens, the moon sets, the stars shine on, and you sleep carried by the ocean, dreaming of pathways made of water and light. Hours pass, maybe 3, maybe 5. Time loses meaning out here where there are no clocks and no one checking them. When you wake, it's not to an alarm or an interruption, but to a natural surfacing of consciousness, the way you'd wake in a hammock on a lazy afternoon. The sky is still dark, but there's a quality to the darkness now, a thinning, a sense that dawn is thinking about arriving in an hour or two. Kainoa is still beside you, looking not at all tired despite having been awake all night. One of the younger crew members, a teenage boy with a serious expression and fresh tattoos still healing on his shoulders, sits with him, receiving instruction in low voices. You catch fragments, wave intervals, star declinations, the names of currents. "You're awake," Kainoa says without looking at you, somehow sensing the change in your breathing or body position. Good timing. The ocean is about to show you something most people never see. He points toward the water ahead of the canoe, and at first you see nothing unusual, just darkness and the occasional sparkle of bioluminescence. But as you focus, you start to notice patterns. The bioluminescence isn't random. It's concentrated in long, straight lines extending forward, parallel to your course. And there's something else, darker shapes moving just beneath the surface, too large to be fish. "Dolphins," Kainoa says. "They're bow riding, playing in the pressure wave the canoe creates, but look at what they're showing us." The dolphins, you can see them more clearly now, sleek bodies barely breaking the surface, are swimming through the water in a specific pattern, and their movement is lighting up the bioluminescent plankton, creating glowing trails that reveal something otherwise invisible: the current structure. The water ahead isn't uniform. It's stratified, layers of different temperatures and densities sliding past each other, and the bioluminescence, disturbed by the dolphin's movement, makes this visible as glowing boundaries between invisible rivers. They know, Kainoa says quietly. They know we're navigating and they're helping, showing us the current boundaries, the path of least resistance. Or maybe they're just playing and we're the ones reading meaning into their joy. Either way, we learn. The teenage apprentice is staring at the display with an expression approaching religious awe. Kainoa places a hand on his shoulder. Hoku, he says, the boy's name meaning star. Tell our guest what you're learning to feel. Hoku looks at you shyly, clearly not comfortable speaking to strangers, but he gathers himself and says in careful, accented words, "The water is colder now, just slightly, maybe half a degree. We've crossed into a different current, the one that runs northwest along the island chain. And the waves, the interval is shorter, coming faster. 13 seconds between swells instead of 15. That means we're approaching the channel between Huahine and Riedia. The islands constrain the ocean, make the waves behave differently. If we stay in this current, maintain this heading, by tomorrow afternoon we'll see the clouds standing over Riedia." He says this with absolute certainty. A kid who looks about 15 declaring that he can predict the location of an island still more than 100 miles away based on water temperature and wave timing. And the scary part is, you're starting to believe it. Starting to understand that this isn't mysticism or luck but refined observation, pattern recognition developed to an almost superhuman degree. Kainoa nods approvingly. "You're learning, your father would be proud." Something passes between them, a shared grief maybe. You sense that Hoku's father was also a navigator and is no longer alive. "Now practice your star sighting. We have 2 hours until dawn. Use them." Hoku moves to the front of the canoe, lying on his back, staring up at the stars, his lips moving silently as he recites chants, commits to memory the exact positions of specific stars at this specific moment, building his internal star compass one observation at a time. Around him, other crew members are doing various tasks. One is fishing, trailing a line behind the canoe. Another is doing some kind of maintenance on the rigging. But there's a peacefulness to their activity, a lack of urgency that suggests this is exactly where they want to be, doing exactly what they want to do. "You asked earlier," Kainoa says to you, "how we found every island in the Pacific. The technical answer is what I've been teaching you: stars, waves, birds, clouds, all of it. But the real answer is simpler. We left. We kept leaving. We saw an island, settled it, and then people, the restless ones, the curious ones, the ones who couldn't stop wondering what was beyond the horizon. They built canoes and left again, not knowing if there was anything out there, not knowing if they'd ever see land again. Just trusting that the ocean is vast, and vast spaces usually contain something worth finding." He pauses, and his voice takes on a different quality, less instructor and more storyteller. There's a chant about the first great navigator, Rata. He had a dream that beyond the horizon, beyond all known islands, there was a land so large you could walk for days without reaching the ocean. His elders called him crazy. His wife begged him not to go. But he built a canoe. The chants describe exactly how, what trees to use, what prayers to say, what offerings to make, and he sailed west with a crew of believers. They were gone 3 years. Everyone assumed they died. But they came back with stories of New Zealand, of islands so huge they had their own mountains, their own seasons, rivers that ran year-round instead of seasonal streams. And once he proved it was possible, others followed. Within generations, New Zealand was fully settled. The story hangs in the air, and you can feel its weight. Not just the adventure of it, but what it represents. Humans willing to sail into complete unknowns on nothing but faith and skill, risking everything on the belief that courage and knowledge would be enough. No rescue services, no satellite phones, no way to call for help if something went wrong. Just you, your crew, your canoe, and the ocean's mercy. Of course, Kainoa adds with dry humor, many canoes never came back. We don't have chance about those ones, but we know they existed. The ocean keeps those secrets. For every successful voyage, there were probably 10 that ended with everyone dying of thirst, or getting caught in storms, or simply sailing past their destination into empty ocean until starvation took them. We celebrate the successes because they're worth celebrating, but we know the cost. The ocean gives, but it also takes. That's the contract. The dolphins have moved on, disappearing into the dark water ahead, their bioluminescent trails fading. But the lesson they illustrated remains, that the ocean is full of information, full of signs and signals if you develop the literacy to read them. You think about how different this is from modern navigation, where you look at a screen that tells you your exact coordinates, your speed, your heading, all calculated by satellites and computers. This kind of navigation is embodied, organic, requiring your full presence and attention. There's something deeply human about it, but also something almost post-human, a level of sensory integration that modern people have traded away for convenience. Tell me about the moon temples, you say, because Kainoa mentioned them earlier, and because you sense this voyage is not just a literal journey, but a framework for exploring Polynesian lunar traditions. Their understanding of how the moon governs so much of island life. Kainoa looks toward the eastern horizon where the moon set hours ago. That's tomorrow's lesson, he says, or technically today's, since dawn is coming. When we make landfall on Rheadia, you'll see. The Mary there, the temple platforms, they're aligned to lunar events, the extreme rising and setting points of the moon's complex path. Because while your Western astronomy was busy tracking the sun's yearly path through the zodiac, we were mapping something harder, the moon's 18.6-year cycle, the nodes and inclinations, the way she dances through the sky in a pattern so complex it took centuries to fully understand. He's teasing future knowledge, and you feel it like a hook setting, the desire to know more. But there's also genuine sleepiness returning, the exhaustion of absorbing so much information, of trying to comprehend a worldview so different from your own. Kainoa seems to sense this too. Rest, he says gently. The ocean will still be here when you wake, and so will we, closer to land, closer to the next chapter. Navigation isn't just about reaching your destination. It's about being fully present for the journey. And right now, your journey is into sleep, into dreams where maybe some of what you're learning will sort itself out in that mysterious way the unconscious mind works, making connections your waking self can't quite grasp yet. You settle back down onto the smooth platform, and the crew has draped some kind of woven mat over you at some point, soft, still warm from someone's body heat, smelling faintly of coconut oil and salt. The canoe rocks with that gentle, hypnotic rhythm, and Kainoa's voice continues, softer now, saying something about how the best navigators can sleep while sailing, their subconscious mind still tracking the boat's movement, still feeling the waves and wind. So they wake instantly if something changes, if the heading drifts or weather shifts. It's not really sleep, he says, but a kind of restful awareness, being asleep and alert simultaneously, dissolved into the journey itself. His words start blending together, meaning giving way to pure sound, and you're dimly aware that this is intentional, that he's using his voice like a tool to guide you down into deeper rest. The stars above are fading as dawn approaches, the eastern sky showing the first hints of indigo, that particular shade that only exists in the minutes before sunrise when night and day are negotiating the handoff. And on that image, the sky changing colors, dawn approaching over the Pacific, the canoe continuing its patient glide through water older than mountains, carrying you toward an island you haven't seen yet, but that exists with certainty, waiting. You sink into sleep again. Deeper this time, your dreaming mind now populated with stars and dolphins and wave patterns, chants in unknown languages weaving through your neurons. The whole complex tapestry of Polynesian navigation, seeping into your subconscious, where it will rearrange itself into understanding while your conscious mind rests. The ocean rocks you. The stars watch over you. The navigators keep their vigil. And somewhere ahead, still beyond the horizon but approaching with mathematical certainty, Raiadia waits, an island sacred to navigators, home to moon temples and tide prophecies, the next chapter of this dream journey through ancient Polynesian wisdom. Sleep now, trust the ocean, trust the navigators, trust that when you wake, you'll be exactly where you're supposed to be, having traveled through darkness to arrive at dawn, the oldest and most reliable promise the world makes. That night always, always yields to light. The canoe's gentle swaying pulls you deeper into sleep, and in that liminal space between waking and dreaming, you become aware of the water itself, not as something external, but as an extension of consciousness, millions of cubic miles of memory and motion, holding within its depths every voyage ever made, every navigator who ever trusted their body to read its language, every story whispered across its surface by wind and current. Time dissolves. You might sleep for minutes or hours. When awareness returns, it comes gradually, layered. First, the sound of voices speaking in normal tones rather than hushed whispers. Then the warmth of sunlight on your face. Then the smell of something cooking, smoke and fish and something sweet, almost like caramelized fruit. You open your eyes to find the world transformed. It's mid-morning now, the sun well above the horizon, and the ocean has traded its mysterious darkness for brilliant, impossible blue. The kind of blue that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth, so saturated and luminous it almost hurts. The water is transparent, revealing depths below where you can see the sandy bottom in the shallower sections, coral formations in the deeper parts, and fish, countless fish, moving in schools that shift direction with unified precision, like a single organism with 1,000 bodies. But what captures your attention, what makes your breath catch, is the land. Off the starboard side, perhaps 3 miles away, an island rises from the ocean, volcanic peaks covered in dense green vegetation, their summits wrapped in clouds that cling like scarves. The coastline is fringed with white sand beaches, and further out, the telltale line of breaking waves that marks the barrier reef surrounding the island like a protective necklace. Even from this distance, you can see the contrast between the deep blue of the open ocean, the lighter turquoise of the lagoon behind the reef, and the white foam of surf breaking on coral. Raiadia, Kainoa says, appearing beside you with a wooden bowl containing some kind of fish stew. We arrived during the night, but I let you sleep. You looked like you needed it. He grins, the expression transforming his weathered face into something almost mischievous. Also, you were snoring loud enough to scare away the good fishing, so keeping you asleep was an act of mercy for everyone. You accept the bowl, suddenly ravenous, and the stew is incredible. Chunks of fresh fish in a coconut milk broth with taro and something that might be breadfruit, flavored with herbs you can't identify, but that taste of the island itself, green and vital. You eat while Kainoa points out features of the approaching land. See those breaks in the reef? Natural channels deep enough for our canoe but narrow. The tide is currently flooding coming in, so we'll ride it through the channel and into the lagoon. Timing matters. Try to enter when the tide is going out and you're fighting a river. The ocean drains through those channels fast enough to flip a canoe if you're careless. But now, with the tide coming in, it's like the island is inviting us, pulling us toward shore. As he speaks, the crew adjusts the sail, and the canoe alters course, heading toward one of the reef breaks. You can see it more clearly now. A gap in the line of white water, the waves noticeably smaller there, the water's color shifting from deep blue to that luminous turquoise. As you approach, the sound changes too, the ocean's open water roar becoming more complex, layered with the specific tones of waves breaking on coral, water surging through narrow passages, the entire reef system humming with energy. Hold tight, Kainoa advises, and then you're in the channel. The sensation is extraordinary. The current grabs the canoe, accelerating you forward, and suddenly you're moving at twice the speed you were before, the water rushing beneath the hulls with a sound like continuous thunder. The reef rises on either side, massive coral formations sculpted into fantastic shapes by centuries of waves, encrusted with life in colors you didn't know existed in nature. Electric blues, hot pinks, acid greens, all visible through the crystal water. Fish explode away from the canoe's shadow, parrotfish, surgeonfish, triggerfish, and you catch glimpses of larger shapes in the deeper sections, sharks maybe, or big jacks patrolling the reef edge. The crew is focused now, two of them working the sail while another stands at the bow with a pole, ready to fend off coral heads if you drift too close. Kainoa has the steering oar, making constant small corrections, reading the current's pulls and eddies, guiding the canoe through the channel with the precision of someone who has done this 1,000 times and knows that carelessness here means getting thrown onto razor-sharp coral. The canoe shattered, everyone swimming through shark-infested waters hoping to reach shore before exhaustion or blood loss takes them. But his face shows no tension, only concentration and something like joy, the pleasure of skill being exercised at its highest level, of human ability and natural forces finding perfect synchronization. And then, after maybe 2 minutes that feel like 2 hours, you're through. The current releases you. The canoe glides into the calm water of the lagoon, and it's like entering a cathedral. The lagoon is vast, perhaps a mile across, its water so still and clear you can see individual sand grains on the bottom 15 feet below. The interior coastline of the island rises ahead, less dramatic than the outer shore but somehow more intimate, beaches backed by coconut palms, small streams emptying into the lagoon, and near the shore human construction. Houses on stilts, their roofs thatched with palm fronds, larger structures that might be communal buildings or storage facilities. And set back from the beach, on a raised platform of fitted stones, something that makes your pulse quicken even though you can't articulate why. A mari, a temple platform, its rectangular form oriented with obvious intentionality, aligned to something celestial or geographical, a place where the human and divine negotiate their relationship. The Moon Temple, Kainoa says quietly, following your gaze. Tapu-Tapuadia, it means sacrifices from far lands, the most sacred mari in all of Polynesia. Navigators come here before major voyages to receive blessings, to consult with the high priests and priestesses who read the moon's messages. And after successful voyages, they return to give thanks, to offer part of their catch, to tell their stories so the knowledge spreads. The canoe approaches the shore, and people are emerging from the houses, adults and children calling greetings, wading into the shallow water to help pull the canoe up onto the beach. There's a joy in the reunion, crew members embracing people you assume are family, news being exchanged rapidly in that musical language. Kainoa accepts greetings from several elders, clearly people of status based on their elaborate tattoos and the deference others show them. You step onto the beach and the sand is warm beneath your feet, so fine it feels like powder. After hours on the canoe, solid ground feels almost wrong, too stable, lacking the ocean's constant motion. You catch yourself swaying slightly, your inner ear still calibrated for waves. Come, Kainoa says, gesturing toward the mari. The high priestess is expecting us. Well, not us specifically, but she knew a navigator's canoe would arrive today. The moon told her. You want to ask how the moon could communicate arrival times of specific boats, but you've learned enough by now to understand that asking won't produce a simple answer, that the explanation will involve layers of knowledge about lunar phases and their correlation with favorable sailing conditions, about cultural patterns where voyages tend to begin at certain times of the lunar month, about probability and pattern recognition dressed in the language of prophecy. So instead, you follow. The path from the beach leads through a grove of coconut palms, their trunks leaning at dramatic angles, their fronds rustling in the trade wind that blows constantly across the island. You pass gardens where taro grows in carefully maintained beds, where banana plants cluster with their enormous leaves, where breadfruit trees tower overhead heavy with their massive, starchy fruits. Everything is abundance here, the island producing food with seemingly minimal effort, the volcanic soil and tropical climate creating paradise for agriculture. The Mary rises ahead, and as you get closer, its scale becomes apparent. The platform is enormous, perhaps 80 feet long and 40 wide, constructed from fitted stones, some of which must weigh several tons. The stones are dark volcanic rock, placed with such precision that you couldn't slip a blade between them, the entire structure level despite the uneven terrain. At one end stands a series of upright stones, menhirs that lean slightly backward, their silhouettes stark against the sky. And behind the Mary, carved wooden figures, tikis, stand in a line, their stylized faces both comical and menacing, their bodies covered in designs that seem to shift and writhe when you're not looking directly at them. A woman sits at the center of the platform, and even from a distance you can feel the weight of her presence. She's old, ancient, really. Her face a map of wrinkles, her body thin but somehow not frail, possessing that wiry strength some elders develop. Her hair is white, long, hanging loose down her back. She wears a tapa cloth wrapped around her waist and nothing else, her chest bare, her skin decorated with tattoos so dense and complex they form almost a second skin, geometric patterns interwoven with stylized natural forms, waves, fish, birds, celestial objects. As you approach, she opens her eyes. You hadn't realized they were closed and looks directly at you. Her gaze is disconcerting, too direct, too knowing, like she can see not just your face but through it, into the spaces where you store things you don't examine closely. Another dreamer, she says in accented but clear English, her voice surprisingly strong. Good, the moon appreciates witnesses. Kainoa bows slightly, a gesture of respect you haven't seen him make for anyone else. Kaimana, he says, her name, meaning diamond or ocean power. I've brought a visitor who wishes to understand our ways. I told them you could explain the moon's language better than anyone. Kaimana gestures for you to sit, and you climb onto the platform, settling on the warm stone. Up close, her tattoos are even more intricate. You can make out specific lunar phases encoded in the patterns, star configurations, wave designs that seem to flow across her skin. She's looking past you toward the ocean, visible between the palm trees, its surface sparkling in the midday sun. The moon, she begins without preamble, is not one thing. Your culture sees one moon, one cycle, 29.5 days from new to full and back to new. Simple. But simple is for simple minds, and the moon is not simple. She has layers, cycles within cycles, secrets she only reveals to those who pay attention for years, decades, lifetimes. She pauses, and her hand moves through the air, tracing invisible patterns. The cycle everyone knows, the phases from new to full. We divide it into 30 nights, not 29. 30 has meaning, can be divided by more numbers, is more useful. Each night has a name, and each name tells you what that moon is good for. The first night after new moon, Haya, good for planting roots, things that grow underground. The seventh night, Kyulua, good for fishing for deep water species. The 14th night, Aqua, sacred, do no work, only prayer and rest. The 23rd night, Cain, good for harvesting, for cutting timber. She's reciting these calmly, but you sense there are all 30 names, each with specific associated activities, agricultural and fishing knowledge encoded in a lunar calendar that's been tested and refined over centuries. But that's just the beginning, Kaimana continues. The simple cycle. The moon has other secrets. She doesn't rise and set in the same places every night. Her path across the sky changes over a period of 18.6 years. Your astronomers know this, the lunar standstill cycle, but they know it with numbers, with measurements. We know it with our bodies, with observation, with this temple. She points to the upright stones at the end of the platform. Those markers show the extreme positions where the moon rises and sets during her long cycle, the northern extreme and the southern extreme. When the moon reaches her northern limit, we call this the time of high moon. She rises far north of where the sun ever rises, sets far north of where the sun sets. She climbs high in the sky, gives strong light, creates extreme tides. When she reaches her southern limit 9 years later, low moon, she barely climbs above the horizon. Her light is weak. Tides are strange, unpredictable. You're trying to visualize this, imagining the moon's rising and setting positions oscillating back and forth over nearly 2 decades. A slow dance that ancient Polynesians tracked with such precision they built permanent stone markers to record the extremes. It seems impossible that a culture without written records, without telescopes or computers, could map something this subtle. And yet the stones are there, aligned with mathematical precision, recording observations that must have taken generations to compile. The tides, Kaimana says, and now she's looking at you again, her eyes fierce. You understand tides. The moon pulls the ocean, creates bulges, high tides where the moon is overhead and on the opposite side of Earth, low tides in between, but it's not simple. The sun pulls too, fights with the moon, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering. When they align new moon and full moon, you get spring tides, the highest highs and lowest lows. When they're at right angles, quarter moons, you get neap tides, smaller, gentler. She's describing what Western science calls spring and neap tides, but she's doing it from direct observation, from cultural knowledge built by people who lived with the ocean every day, whose survival depended on knowing when the water would rise and fall, when it was safe to gather reef food, when channels would be passable or dangerously fast. But even that's too simple, she continues, and you hear frustration in her voice. The frustration of someone trying to compress complex knowledge into simple words for someone who lacks the foundational understanding. The moon's orbit is elliptical, not circular. Sometimes she's closer to Earth. We call this the moon coming to visit, and her pull is stronger. Sometimes she's farther. The moon is traveling, and her pull is weaker. And remember the 18-year cycle. When the moon is at high moon, the spring tides are the most extreme spring tides. When she's at low moon, even spring tides are somewhat diminished. All these cycles overlay, interfere, create patterns within patterns. Your head is spinning trying to track all this. Daily tidal cycles, monthly spring neap cycles, monthly perigee-apogee cycles, the 19-year standstill cycle, all interacting, all creating variations in when and how much the ocean rises and falls. And Polynesian cultures tracked all of it, named all of it, incorporated it into their planning and decision-making without the benefit of tide tables or calculations. The priestesses of the moon, Kaimana says, her voice softening slightly. We are trained from childhood to observe, to memorize, to predict. We watch the ocean every day, note the high tide line on specific beaches, correlate it with the moon's phase, position, distance. We do this for years, building a felt sense of the patterns. And then we consult tide pools. Tide pools, you ask, speaking for the first time since sitting down. She smiles, the expression transforming her severe face into something almost grandmotherly. Come. The tide is perfect for what I want to show you. Theory is useful, but the ocean teaches better than words. She rises with surprising fluidity for someone her age and leads you and Kainoa off the platform, down another path that winds toward the coastline. You emerge on a rocky shore, the volcanic rock carved into fantastic formations by millennia of wave action, holes and tunnels and shallow basins. And in those basins, trapped by the receding tide, pools of water remain, each one a miniature ecosystem, isolated from the ocean until the next high tide reconnects them. Kaimana approaches one of the larger pools, perhaps 6 feet across and 2 feet deep at its center. She kneels at its edge, her hand hovering over the water, not quite touching. "Look," she says simply. You peer into the pool. The water is crystal clear, and the bottom is a landscape of coralline algae, small corals, sea urchins, tiny fish darting between anemones. It's beautiful but seems unremarkable, just a tidal pool like thousands of others around the world. Watch the fish, Kaimana instructs, the small silver ones. You focus on them, little fish, maybe 2 inches long, swimming in loose schools near the surface. At first they seem to be moving randomly, but as you watch, you start to notice a pattern. They're circling the pool in a specific direction, and their speed seems to vary rhythmically, faster then slower then faster again. They're following the current, Kaimana says. Even trapped in this pool, isolated from the ocean, they feel the tidal rhythm. The water itself remembers the tide, moves in sympathy with it even when cut off. The fish follow that movement. If you watch them every day track when they swim fastest, you can predict the tides without ever looking at the open ocean. The pool is a model, a teaching tool, showing the ocean's rhythm in miniature. She moves to another pool, this one smaller, shallower. This one tells different information. See the anemones. Count how many tentacles are extended. You count. Maybe half the anemones have tentacles out. The other half are retracted into tight balls. They feed when plankton is thick in the water, Kaimana explains. And plankton follows tidal currents, concentrates at certain times. When most anemones are feeding, it means the tide is bringing rich water from the deep ocean. When they're retracted, the tide is stagnant, poor feeding. I have 17 pools I check daily, each telling me something different about tidal patterns, water quality, approaching weather. These pools are my library, my archive of ocean knowledge, and they teach anyone willing to sit and observe. She spends the next hour showing you pool after pool, each one apparently containing specific information. Sea urchin movement patterns that correlate with monthly cycles, hermit crab behavior that changes with approaching storms, algae growth rates that indicate water temperature trends. It's phenomenally complex, a system of natural indicators that function as instruments, biological sensors providing real-time data about oceanic conditions. And between pools, she tells you stories, not in the scholarly way Kainoa explained navigation, but in the mythic style of oral tradition, stories about moon goddesses who fell in love with mortals, about tides that rose so high they swallowed entire islands as punishment for disrespecting the ocean, about priestesses who learned to breathe underwater and swam down to consult with the creatures of the reef, returning with prophecies encoded in the patterns they saw on fish scales and coral formations. The stories are obviously metaphorical, teaching tools wrapped in narrative, but there's power in them, a weight that straight factual explanation lacks. When Kaimana tells you about the goddess Hina beating tapa cloth by moonlight and how the rhythm of her beating set the pattern for the tides, you understand she's really teaching you about lunar periodicities and their oceanic effects. But the story makes it memorable, gives it emotional resonance, ties abstract knowledge to human experience. The sun moves across the sky as you move from pool to pool, and you lose track of time, falling into the rhythm of Kaimana's instruction. Observe this, notice that, remember this pattern, watch for these signs. Your modern mind keeps trying to organize the information into categories and hierarchies to build a mental database, but it's too much, too interconnected. You realize you're experiencing what apprentice priestesses must have felt. The overwhelming flood of information that can only be absorbed gradually, through repetition and immersion, until it becomes intuitive rather than intellectual knowledge. The question people always ask, Kaimana says as you're examining a particularly beautiful pool filled with purple sea urchins, is how we predict specific events. They want to know, when will the highest tide of the year occur? Or what day should we launch our fishing fleet? And the answer is frustrating for minds trained in Western thinking. We know because we've observed the patterns for so long that we can feel them coming, the same way you can feel a sneeze building before it happens. We don't calculate, we recognize. She stands brushing sand from her knees. But there are tools, methods that look more like your mathematics even though they emerged independently. Come, there's one more thing you should see before the sun sets. She leads you back to the Mary, but this time you approach from a different angle, and you notice something you missed before. A series of holes drilled into the platform itself, each about 6 inches deep and 3 inches in diameter, arranged in a specific pattern that takes you a moment to recognize. They form a circle, or rather a spiral, each hole positioned slightly higher than the previous one, the entire arrangement creating a three-dimensional form that seems both random and intentional. A lunar computer, Kaimana says with evident pride. Or that's what the archaeologist from your university called it when he visited 20 years ago. We just call it the moon tracker. You place stones in the holes to mark the moon's position over time, building a physical record of her movement. After enough months, enough years, the pattern becomes visible, predictable. You can see the cycles, anticipate future positions. She demonstrates, placing small white stones in specific holes, explaining that each stone represents where the moon appeared at moonrise on a particular night, the holes positioned to mirror the horizon positions. As she places more stones, you start to see it, the pattern of oscillation, the way the moon's rising position swings back and forth over the months, the slow drift of that oscillation over years. It's an analog computer, a mechanical way of tracking and predicting lunar movement without mathematics, using physical position and memory instead of numbers and formulas. The priestesses maintain this, Kaimana continues. Every night for hundreds of years, someone has placed a stone, removed old stones, kept the record continuous. The pattern it reveals, that's how we know when high moon and low moon occur, how we predict the extreme tides, how we advise the navigators on optimal departure times. The moon tells us her secrets by writing them in stone, and we learn to read her script. The sun is getting low now, approaching the horizon, the light taking on that golden quality of late afternoon. Kaimana sits on the Mary platform, and you join her, both of you facing west toward the ocean visible through the palms. Kainoa has wandered off somewhere, giving you space with the priestess, understanding perhaps that this teaching requires intimacy, the transmission of knowledge that works best in quieter, more personal exchanges. There's a reason, Kaimana says quietly, that we call the moon Mahina, the light in darkness. She provides illumination, obviously, but more than that. She provides order, predictability, pattern. The sun gives life, heat, energy, but the moon gives time. Without her phases, how would you track anything longer than a day but shorter than a season? How would you schedule ceremonies, coordinate activities across islands, know when to expect traveling family members? She's right, you realize. In a pre-clock, pre-calendar culture, The moon serves as the primary timekeeper for anything beyond daily rhythms. Her phases are visible, consistent, countable, the perfect natural calendar. And for us islanders especially, she continues, the moon controls our highway. The ocean rises and falls at her command. Channels become passable or impassable. Reefs emerge or submerge. Beach access appears or disappears. To live with the ocean, you must live with the moon. They're inseparable. So we study her, honor her, build temples aligned to her movements, train priestesses to interpret her influences. Not worship exactly, we're too practical for that. More like professional respect. Acknowledgement of power. The sun touches the horizon, and the sky ignites. Oranges and reds and purples so vivid they seem artificial, reflected in the ocean's surface, turning the whole world into a transitional space between fire and water. And as the sun disappears, as the sky begins its shift from day to night, the first stars appear, faint at first but strengthening as darkness deepens. And then, rising in the east behind you, announced by a subtle brightening of the horizon, the moon emerges. She's waxing gibbous, past half but not yet full, her face showing continents of shadow and plains of light, the terminator between them sharp and three-dimensional in a way she never appears in photographs. She climbs slowly, patiently, indifferent to human observation, but commanding it nonetheless through sheer presence. Kaimana doesn't say anything, just watches as the moon rises, her lips moving silently in what might be prayer or chant or simply acknowledgement. You watch too, and in this moment, sitting on ancient stone that has witnessed this scene thousands of times, beside a woman who has dedicated her entire life to understanding lunar rhythms, after a day of learning to see the moon not as a romantic symbol, but as a physical force that moves oceans and structures time, the moon seems different, more real, more powerful, less a thing in the sky and more a presence, an entity, a force that shapes existence in ways both obvious and subtle. The moon continues her ascent, and as full darkness settles over the island, the landscape transforms. The shadows are sharp-edged, the illumination bright enough to read by, and the ocean, visible through gaps in the palms, has become a sheet of hammered silver, each wave crest catching moonlight, each trough holding darkness. The contrast is almost painful, beauty so intense it feels excessive, like the world is showing off. Kaimana rises with a soft grunt, and you follow her back down the path toward the beach. Other people are emerging from their houses now, carrying torches made from coconut fronds soaked in oil, their flames adding warm counterpoint to the moon's cold light. There's a sense of gathering, of ritual beginning, though no one has announced anything formal. People simply know, operating on cultural rhythms so deep they don't require explanation. On the beach, a circle has been formed. Not a perfect geometric circle, but an organic arrangement of people sitting on the sand, spacing themselves naturally. You and Kaimana join them, and Kainoa is there too, having materialized from wherever he went, his face serene in the mixed light of moon and torches. Young children sit with their parents, teenagers cluster together, elders position themselves at the cardinal points as if claiming directional authority. The whole village seems to be present, perhaps 40 people total, small enough that everyone knows everyone, large enough to contain multiple generations of accumulated knowledge. An old man, even older than Kaimana if that's possible, his body bent by time but his eyes still sharp, begins speaking. His voice is thin but carries across the circle, and even though he's speaking in the local language, something about the rhythm and repetition makes you understand this is a chant, a formal recitation. Kaimana leans close, translating in whispers. He's reciting the moon genealogy, she murmurs. The line of priestesses who have studied the moon at this Mary, going back 27 generations. Each name, each achievement, each major discovery or refinement of technique. It takes an hour to recite fully, but he'll give us the condensed version tonight, only the most significant figures. The old man continues, and even without understanding the words, you can hear the structure, each name followed by descriptive phrases, accomplishments, the pattern repeating with variation, building a verbal archive of lunar scholarship. Kaimana whispers translations for a few. Lanny, who discovered the coral spawning, follows the third quarter moon. Hawkia, who predicted the great tsunami by reading unusual tide patterns. Mona, who taught that the moon's distance affects her power. It's a litany of observation, each generation adding layers of understanding, refining predictions, expanding the catalog of lunar influences. And what strikes you is the time frame. 27 generations, perhaps 500 to 600 years of continuous study, each priestess building on her predecessor's work, the whole lineage functioning as a single distributed consciousness, developing lunar expertise with the patience and thoroughness that only multi-generational effort can achieve. When the chant concludes, the old man sits, and a woman perhaps 40 years old, young by the standards of this gathering, stands. She's heavily tattooed, her patterns incorporating lunar phases in obvious ways, crescents and full moons inked across her shoulders and arms. She carries a large wooden bowl filled with water, and she places it at the circle's center where everyone can see. My mother's apprentice, Kamana whispers. She's demonstrating tide prediction using the reflection method. Watch carefully. This technique takes years to master. The woman kneels beside the bowl, positioning it so the moon's reflection is captured on the water's surface. Then she begins adding things to the water, leaves, flower petals, small pieces of wood, arranging them in patterns you can't initially decode. She works silently with total concentration, occasionally glancing at the moon, then back to the bowl, making minute adjustments. She's creating a model, Kamana explains. The bowl represents our lagoon. The objects represent different shoreline features, beaches, rocky outcrops, channel entrances. By watching how the moon's reflection interacts with these objects, how the light bends and fragments, she can predict where the highest tide lines will occur tomorrow, which beaches will be fully submerged, which will still have dry sand. The water's surface mimics the ocean's, and the moon's light shows her what the ocean will do. You watch, mesmerized, as the demonstration continues. The woman adds more objects, removes some, adjusts positions, all while maintaining absolute focus on the interplay of moonlight and water and floating objects. It seems like magic, like scrying or divination, but you're beginning to understand it's something else. An intuitive physics, a way of modeling complex fluid dynamics through analog representation, using the actual forces involved: moonlight, water surface tension, material buoyancy, rather than abstract mathematical formulas. After perhaps 20 minutes, she seems satisfied. She speaks, her voice clear and confident, making what are obviously specific predictions: tide heights, timing, locations. The gathered people nod, some making mental notes, others clearly comparing her predictions to their own knowledge. The whole exercise both teaching tool and demonstration of competence. More demonstrations follow. A teenage boy shows his skill at reading wave patterns in the lagoon, predicting which sections will have the best fishing tomorrow based on how the water moves tonight under the moon's influence. An older woman displays coral samples she's collected, explaining how growth rings in coral record lunar cycles, how you can read a coral structure like a tree's rings to understand past climate patterns and ocean conditions. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, recites the 30 moon names with their associated activities, her high voice piping through the darkness, occasionally forgetting and being prompted by encouraging adults. It's education as performance, knowledge transmission as community ritual. Everyone participates at their skill level, from the expert demonstrations of the priestess in training to the halting recitation of the child still learning. There's no judgment, no hierarchy of value. Each contribution is honored as part of the collective project of maintaining and transmitting lunar knowledge across generations. Kainoa eventually stands, and the circle quiets, giving him space. He doesn't speak immediately but waits, looking around at the gathered faces, making eye contact with individuals, acknowledging presences. When he finally speaks, his voice carries the authority of someone who has earned respect through decades of successful voyages. Tonight we honor the moon, he says, but we also honor the ocean she commands. Navigation is impossible without understanding both. The stars tell us direction, but the moon tells us timing. When to leave, when conditions will be favorable, when tides will help rather than hinder. Every successful voyage is a collaboration between navigator and moon, human skill and celestial force. He gestures toward the ocean, and you can see it beyond the circle, still and bright under the moon's gaze. In 3 days, he continues, I'm leading another voyage, 8 days south to Tahiti, carrying trade goods and 2 families who are relocating. We'll leave at dawn on the 3rd day because the moon will be full that night, maximum light for overnight sailing, and the tide will be ebbing as we depart, carrying us smoothly through the channel. The current patterns this time of month favor southern travel. The moon has arranged conditions perfectly for us. Our job is simply to recognize the gift and accept it with skill. He pauses, and when he speaks again, his voice has shifted, becoming more intimate, almost confessional. I used to think navigation was about human mastery, about conquering the ocean through knowledge and technique. But the older I get, the more I understand it differently. We don't conquer the ocean. We negotiate with it. We study its patterns, respect its power, and work within its rules. The moon is part of that negotiation. She's the ocean's voice, announcing its moods and intentions to those who learn her language. Around the circle, people are nodding, recognizing truth in his words. And you feel it too, the shift from viewing nature as obstacle or resource to seeing it as participant, as partner in the human project of moving through the world. It's a perspective that contradicts so much of modern Western thinking, where the goal is control, is domination, is bending the environment to human will. Here, the goal is harmony, is synchronization, is finding the paths that nature has already provided rather than forcing new ones. The gathering continues as the moon climbs higher, crossing from east toward south, her light brightening as she rises further from the horizon. People share food, roasted fish, baked taro, some kind of sweet pudding made from coconut and breadfruit. Someone produces a drum and music begins, not loud or raucous but gentle, rhythmic, matching the wave sounds that form constant background on any island. A few people dance, their movements stylized, telling stories through gesture, ocean voyages, fishing expeditions, encounters with sea creatures. You sit beside Kaimana, and she's quiet now, content to observe, occasionally offering brief commentary on what you're seeing. That dance represents the navigator reading waves. She's showing how dolphins taught us to recognize current boundaries. He's enacting the story of the first moon priestess receiving knowledge in a dream. The night deepens, and gradually people begin drifting away, children falling asleep in parents' arms and being carried home, elders retiring, younger adults continuing conversations in smaller groups. Eventually, only a handful remain around the dying torches, and Kaimana suggests you walk with her. You follow her along the beach, away from the village, the sand cool now beneath your feet, the moon so bright you can see colors, the pink of scattered shells, the green of seaweed washed ashore, the white of coral fragments. The ocean is calm, the tide high, waves lapping gently at the beach edge with barely any sound. The moon at night is obvious, Kaimana says, breaking the comfortable silence. Everyone can see her, appreciate her light, feel her presence. But the moon works during the day too, invisible but still powerful. The tides don't stop because you can't see her. The ocean doesn't forget her pull just because the sun is bright. Understanding this, that invisible forces still operate, that what you can't see is as important as what you can, that's essential to becoming a true moon reader. She stops walking, bends down, and picks up something from the sand. A cowrie shell, its surface smooth and glossy, patterns spiraling across its back. She holds it up to the moonlight, turning it so you can see how the light catches its curves. Everything curves, she says softly. Nothing in nature is straight. The moon's path curves across the sky. Ocean currents curve, following the Earth's rotation. Shells grow in spirals. Plants reach toward light in arcs. Even time curves, cycles returning but never quite the same, spiraling rather than circling. The moon teaches us to think in curves, in cycles, in patterns that repeat but with variation. Linear thinking is useful for some things, but understanding the ocean, understanding the world. You need to think in spirals. She places the shell in your hand, and it's heavier than you expected, dense, containing years of growth compressed into this small, perfect form. You close your fingers around it, feeling its smoothness, its reality, its existence as a physical object that will outlast your attention, your memory, your life. Keep it, Kaimana says. Remember tonight. Remember that the moon is not decoration, not a romantic symbol to sigh at. She's a force, a teacher, a partner in the project of living with the ocean. Respect her, study her, learn to read her messages. And when you return to your world of electric lights and calendar apps, maybe sometimes on clear nights, you'll look up and remember what you learned here. That humans and nature are not separate, that we're part of a system. And the wisest thing we can do is learn the system's language rather than trying to shout over it in our own. The words settle over you like a blessing, and you realize you're exhausted, not just physically tired but mentally saturated, packed full of new information and perspectives, operating at the edge of your capacity to absorb. Kaimana seems to recognize this because she turns back toward the village without waiting for a response. And you follow, grateful for her understanding that sometimes words are inadequate, that some experiences need to sit in silence for a while before they can be processed. Back at the village, Kainoa has prepared a sleeping space for you in one of the houses. A woven mat on a raised platform, a soft tapa-cloth blanket, a small window open to the night air. You settle in, and through the window you can see the moon, now high overhead, flooding the world with silver light. You can hear the ocean, its rhythm unchanged since the world began, patient and eternal. You can feel the island beneath you, solid and nurturing, this small fragment of land in an enormous ocean, a refuge maintained by people who understand their environment with an intimacy that goes beyond knowledge into something more like love. Sleep begins pulling at you, but before you surrender completely, your mind drifts through the day's experiences. The canoe voyage through darkness, watching dolphins paint current patterns in bioluminescence. Kainoa's lessons about navigation as conversation rather than conquest. The tide pools serving as natural computers. Kaimana demonstrating lunar prediction techniques refined across centuries. The gathering on the beach where an entire community participated in transmitting knowledge that has no written archive. Only living memory passed continuously from teacher to student, generation after generation. You think about the moon overhead, that familiar face you've seen thousands of times but never really understood until now. Not as a dead rock reflecting sunlight, but as a presence, a force that moves oceans and structures time, that pulls at water both outside and inside you. Your body is mostly water after all, subject to the same forces that raise tides, though too small for the effect to be measurable, but still. The principle remains, the connection persists. You think about cycles within cycles, daily tides, monthly phases, yearly seasonal variations, the 18.6-year standstill cycle, all overlapping and interfering, creating complexity that can only be understood through patient observation extended across lifetimes. You think about knowledge that can't be written down without killing it, that requires human transmission, the subtle calibrations of tone and emphasis and context that oral tradition preserves but text flattens. And you think about what it means to live in harmony with natural rhythms rather than fighting against them, what it means to arrange your life around environmental patterns rather than trying to force the environment to accommodate your preferences. It's a different way of being human, one that most of the modern world has abandoned in favor of climate control and artificial lighting and schedules determined by economic demands rather than celestial movements. The moon shines through your window and her light touches your face, cool and silver, and in your drowsing state it almost feels like communication, like she's acknowledging your presence, your attention, your willingness to learn her language. Which is nonsense, obviously. The moon is indifferent to individual humans, operating on scales of time and space that make human lifespans irrelevant. But maybe that's part of the lesson too, learning to be comfortable with your insignificance, finding peace in being part of something larger rather than demanding to be the center. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of the waves outside, and Kainoa's voice drifts back to you from memory. Trust the ocean, trust your body, trust the ancestors who learned this path. Trust, not control, partnership, not domination, listening, not shouting. The moon continues her patient climb across the sky, approaching her meridian, the highest point of her arc where she'll hang for a moment before beginning her descent toward the western horizon. She'll set hours from now, disappearing into daylight, invisible but still present, still pulling at tides, still marking time, still following her ancient path that she's traced billions of times and will trace billions more after everything you know has crumbled into dust. And on that thought, the moon's vast patient indifference, the comfort of being part of eternal cycles, the knowledge that the tides will rise and fall long after you're gone, that the patterns will persist, that someone will still be studying the moon and reading tide pools and navigating by stars centuries from now. The chain of knowledge continuing unbroken as long as humans remain willing to learn. You drift into deeper sleep, your conscious mind releasing its grip, allowing dreams to rise. In your dream, you're standing in a tide pool at night, but the pool is enormous, big as a lagoon, and the moon's reflection on its surface is so bright it hurts to look at. Fish circle you, but they're translucent, made of light rather than flesh, and as they swim they leave trails that form patterns, star maps, current diagrams, genealogies written in bioluminescence. Kaimana is there, but she's young, maybe 20, her face unlined, and she's teaching you to read the fish trails, explaining that this is how ancestors pass knowledge to the living, encoding it in movement and light where it can be read by those trained to see. The dream shifts, and now you're on a canoe, but it's sailing through the sky rather than the ocean, the stars close enough to touch, and each star you pass whispers something. A name, a direction, a warning, a blessing. Kainoa is steering, but he's also somehow the canoe itself, his body merged with the wood, and he's laughing at your confusion, saying, "Everything is everything, didn't I teach you that?" The navigator and the voyage are the same thing. The observer and the observed are one. Separation is illusion. Another shift, and you're deep underwater, pressure enormous, darkness complete, but you can breathe somehow, and you're following something. A sound, a vibration, a call that draws you deeper. You descend through layers of current, each one a different temperature, a different density, and at the bottom, on the ocean floor, there's a temple like the Mary but made of coral, living and growing. And sitting at its center is the moon herself. But she's not in the sky, She's here underwater, small enough to hold, and she's teaching you the final secret, the knowledge that ties everything together. But before you can hear it, before she can speak the words that would complete your understanding, you wake. The real moon is setting now, touching the western horizon visible through your window, her light dimmed by atmospheric interference, her face enormous and golden. Dawn is still hours away, but the night has that quality of late-stage darkness, the deepest hour when the world is quietest, when even the ocean seems to pause and take a breath. You lie still, not wanting to break the spell, holding onto the dream's fragments even as they dissolve into non-meaning. Something was being communicated, some understanding that made perfect sense in the dream state, but that can't survive translation into waking consciousness. It's frustrating but also somehow appropriate. Some knowledge resists capture, exists only in liminal states, in the spaces between sleeping and waking, between knowing and not knowing. The moon slips below the horizon and the world darkens, but the stars remain, countless and patient, and you can identify some of them now: Hokule'a, the North Star, the Southern Cross. Kainoa's lessons already becoming part of your mental map. You're learning to see the night differently, to read the sky as text rather than decoration, to understand the stars as tools rather than just beauty. You close your eyes again and sleep returns, gentler this time, dreamless or at least dream-free enough that nothing remains upon waking. And when you do wake, it's to birdsong and the smell of cooking fish and sunlight streaming through the window, the day announcing itself with cheerful insistence, the night's mysteries yielding to morning's practicalities. But the cowrie shell is still in your hand, solid and real, proof that last night happened, that the lessons were real, that you've been granted entrance, however brief, into a way of understanding the world that predates and may outlast everything your culture considers modern and advanced. You hold the shell, feeling its weight, its curves, its reality, and you know you'll keep it, carry it with you. Use it as a reminder that there are multiple ways to be smart, multiple forms of knowledge, multiple relationships available between humans and the natural world. The moon has set, the night has passed, and you're still here, still learning, still being shaped by this encounter with people who read the ocean like you read books, who navigate by feeling rather than calculation, who maintain knowledge through continuous transmission rather than fixed archives, who understand that wisdom isn't about controlling nature, but about learning its language and speaking it fluently enough to travel safely through its domains. Outside, someone calls your name, Kainoa probably, wondering if you're awake, ready for breakfast, ready for whatever today's lessons will bring. Because the story isn't over. The moon will rise again tonight, different phase, different position, continuing her eternal dance, and the tide pools will still be there, teaching their silent lessons to anyone patient enough to observe. The ocean will keep speaking its complex languages of wave and current and temperature and salinity. The stars will wheel through their nightly rotations, marking time and direction for those who know how to read them. And you're part of it now, woven into the narrative, another student in the long lineage of people who sought to understand rather than conquer, to learn rather than impose, to become fluent in the world's languages rather than demanding it speak yours. It's a small thing, one person gaining one tiny piece of understanding, but that's how it works. Knowledge transmitted person by person, moment by moment, generation after generation. The chain continuous as long as humans remain curious, remain humble, remain willing to sit in tide pools and watch anemones, to lie on canoe decks and memorize stars, to spend lifetimes learning what the moon has to teach. The sun climbs, the day brightens, and you rise to meet it, carrying the night's lessons into daylight, where they'll be tested and refined and expanded, where theory becomes practice, where understanding becomes application. where knowledge becomes wisdom through the slow, patient work of living with what you've learned, making it part of how you move through the world, until eventually you can't remember not knowing. Can't imagine seeing the moon without understanding her power. Can't look at the ocean without reading its patterns. Can't experience night without feeling connected to the vast systems of time and tide that govern this blue planet spinning through space with its bright companion always in attendance, always pulling, always teaching those willing to learn. You emerge from the house into morning sunlight that feels almost aggressive after the gentle mysteries of moonlight, the heat already building though it's barely past dawn. The village is awake, active, children running between houses, women tending cooking fires, men working on canoe repairs. Everything feels more ordinary in daylight, less mystical, though the sacred quality hasn't entirely dissipated. It's just been folded into daily life. The way profound things often are when you live with them constantly rather than encountering them as rare experiences. Kainoa is waiting near the beach with wooden bowls of food, some kind of fish porridge, sliced mango, coconut water in a hollowed shell. You eat together in comfortable silence, watching the lagoon's surface shift from dark blue to turquoise as the sun climbs higher, illuminating the water's depths. You can see fish moving in schools, their shadows crossing the sandy bottom, the whole ecosystem visible and vibrant in the clear water. Today, Kainoa says eventually, Kaimana wants to show you the dream practices, the night marchers and the ancestor paths, the parts of our moon tradition that your culture would call supernatural, though we don't really separate natural and supernatural the way you do. It's all one system, the physical tides and the spirit tides, the actual moon overhead and the moon that appears in visions, the waking world and the dreaming world. They're not opposites, they're layers. He says this casually, but you can hear the warning underneath, that you're about to be introduced to concepts that will challenge your rationalist worldview, that can't be easily explained or categorized, that exist in the spaces where culture and psychology and maybe something else entirely intersect. The question, Kainoa continues, is whether you're willing to experience something you can't immediately explain, because you can't understand this part by observing from outside. You have to participate, and participation means temporarily suspending your certainty about what's real and what isn't. Can you do that? You consider this. Can you? You've been raised in a culture that demands evidence, that privileges scientific explanation, that treats unexplainable experiences with suspicion. But you've also learned enough in the past day to recognize that the boundaries between legitimate knowledge and dismissed superstition are culturally constructed, that what seems irrational from one perspective might be sophisticated practical psychology from another. I'll try, you say, and Kainoa nods, apparently satisfied with that level of commitment. Kaimana appears as if summoned by the conversation, moving down the beach toward you with that distinctive walk of very old people who have learned to negotiate with gravity rather than fighting it. She's carrying a woven bag over her shoulder, and she settles onto the sand beside you without preamble. Dream work, she announces. The part of lunar knowledge that makes Western scientists uncomfortable because it can't be measured with their instruments. But we've been practicing controlled dreaming for longer than your culture has had writing, and it works. Not always, not perfectly, but consistently enough that we trust it, incorporate it into decision-making, train each generation in the techniques. She reaches into her bag and produces a wooden bowl, similar to the one used last night for the tide reflection demonstration, but smaller, more personal. Its interior is stained dark, as if from centuries of use, and carved with patterns that seem to shift depending on the angle of light. This bowl, she says, belonged to my teacher, and to her teacher before her, back 7 generations. It's used for what we call moon gazing, a technique for entering specific dream states where information becomes available that's hidden during normal waking consciousness. Your psychologists might call it accessing the subconscious or achieving a trance state. We just call it listening to the ancestors. She fills the bowl with water from a gourd, then adds something. A few drops of some liquid that spreads across the water's surface, creating iridescent patterns, rainbows of color that swirl and merge. Coconut oil, she explains, mixed with juice from specific plants. Nothing psychoactive, nothing that alters brain chemistry artificially. It just changes how light reflects on the water, creates moving patterns that help focus attention, induce the state we're aiming for. The morning sun hits the water at an angle, and the patterns are indeed mesmerizing, constantly shifting, creating forms that almost look like something: a face, a fish, a canoe, before dissolving into randomness again. You can feel your eyes wanting to track the movement, your mind wanting to find meaning in the chaos. The technique, Kamana continues, requires preparation. You don't just stare into the bowl and expect visions. First, you must empty yourself. Set aside your agenda, your expectations, your certainty about what you'll find. Approach with humility, with genuine openness to receiving information rather than confirming what you already believe. This is harder than it sounds, especially for educated people trained to analyze rather than receive. She's looking at you pointedly, and you feel the accuracy of her assessment. Your default mode is exactly that: analyzing, categorizing, fitting new information into existing frameworks. The idea of emptying yourself, of approaching experience without preconceptions, feels almost impossible. We'll start simpler, Kaimana says, apparently reading your doubt. Before you can dream with purpose, you need to remember your dreams. Most people dream every night but forget within minutes of waking. The first training is learning to hold dreams, to bring them back from the night country into daylight memory. We have techniques. Over the next hour, she teaches you methods for setting intention before sleep, telling yourself you will remember, creating that expectation. Techniques for waking slowly without moving. Sudden movement scatters dream memory like startling fish. Practices for recording dreams immediately, speaking them aloud, drawing symbols in sand. Any method that captures the content before it evaporates. Dreams are shy, Kamana explains. They don't like the harsh light of full consciousness. You have to meet them halfway, in that space between sleeping and waking where both are possible simultaneously. The moon helps. Her light is gentler than the sun's, less demanding. That's why moon priestesses often do our deepest work at night, in moonlight, maintaining connection to the dreaming state even while technically awake. She describes the different types of dreams recognized in Polynesian tradition. Ordinary dreams that process daily experience and have no special meaning. Teaching dreams where ancestors or spirits provide instruction. Prophetic dreams that show future events. And the rarest and most valued, voyaging dreams, where the dreamer's consciousness actually travels, visiting distant locations or even other realms of existence. The voyaging dreams, she says, her voice dropping lower, more serious, those are the ones we use for navigation. A skilled dreamer can travel ahead of a physical voyage, scout the route, identify dangers or opportunities. The dream canoe travels faster than physical canoes, can cover in one night what might take weeks of sailing. The information isn't always perfectly accurate. Dreams have their own logic, their own way of representing reality. But experienced dreamers learn to translate, to extract useful data from symbolic presentation. You want to dismiss this as pure fantasy, but you remember Kainoa's warning about participating rather than judging, and you try to hold space for the possibility that there's something here, some technique or practice that produces results even if the explanation doesn't match your scientific framework. The moon's phase matters, Kamana continues. Different phases support different dream work. New moon, the dark nights. Those are best for deep journeying, for traveling far from your body, because there's less pull back to the physical world. Full moon, maximum light. Those nights are better for teaching dreams, for receiving clear instruction, because the illumination carries into dream space, makes things visible that would be hidden in darker phases. Quarter moons, half light, half dark. Those are transition times, good for dreams that involve change, transformation, death, and rebirth. She's describing a lunar calendar of dreaming, a system for scheduling different types of consciousness work based on the moon cycle. It's internally consistent, clearly refined through long practice, and whether or not it works through the mechanism she describes, you can see how the practice itself, paying attention to sleep, setting intentions, working with natural cycles, might produce genuine psychological benefits and possibly even useful insights. The night marchers, Kainoa says, speaking for the first time in a while, they're part of this tradition. The spirits of ancient warriors and chiefs who process along old sacred paths on certain nights, especially around the new moon and full moon. Most people hear the story and think it's just superstition, ghost tales to scare children, but it's more complex than that. He pauses, choosing his words carefully. The night marchers are real in the sense that people experience them, hear the drums, see the torches, feel the presence of something moving past. Whether they're actual spirits or some kind of collective cultural hallucination or natural phenomena misinterpreted or something else entirely. That question is less interesting to us than how to respond appropriately when you encounter them. Because encounter them people do, with surprising regularity, and there are protocols, ways of showing respect that keep you safe. Kaimana nods agreement. The protocol is simple. If you hear the drums approaching, lie face down, don't look, don't move, barely breathe. Let them pass. They're not interested in you, not malicious, just following their ancient roots, and as long as you don't interfere or show disrespect, they'll ignore you. But if you stand and watch, if you challenge them or block their path, that's when danger occurs. People have died or gone mad or disappeared. We have documented cases going back generations. She says this matter-of-factly, without dramatic emphasis, which somehow makes it more unsettling than if she tried to scare you. To her, this is just practical information, like knowing not to swim during a riptide or walk under falling coconuts. The dream connection, she continues, is that skilled dreamers can sometimes join the night marchers, travel with them in dream form while the body sleeps safely. The marchers know dream travelers, accept them as participants rather than witnesses, and from that vantage, moving with them rather than cowering before them, you can learn things. See the old paths they follow, paths that often mark underground water sources or locations of ancient temples now overgrown and forgotten. Understand the history they're commemorating, the events they're eternally reenacting. Sometimes they'll even communicate, answer questions, provide guidance, though always in indirect ways, through symbol and metaphor rather than clear speech. You're having trouble processing this. The rational part of your mind is screaming that this is nonsense, that spirits don't exist, that what people are experiencing is probably misidentified natural phenomena or cultural expectation creating false memories. But another part, maybe your intuition, maybe just exhaustion from fighting against everything you're being told, is willing to consider that the literal truth of spirit existence might be less important than the fact that people have genuine experiences in this realm. Experiences that affect behavior and decision-making and cultural practice in measurable ways. I want to teach you the beginnings of dream control, Kaimana says, returning to the bowl of water with its swirling oil patterns. Not a full initiation that takes years, requires commitment you're not prepared to make. But the basic technique, the entry point, so you understand what we're doing rather than just hearing about it secondhand. She positions the bowl so the sun's reflection creates maximum pattern complexity on the water's surface. Sit comfortably. Breathe normally. Focus your eyes on the water but don't track any particular pattern. Let your vision soften, go slightly unfocused. You're not trying to see clearly. You're trying to see differently, to stop your normal visual processing and allow something else to emerge. You follow her instructions, settling into the sand, gazing at the bowl. At first, nothing happens except mild eye strain. The patterns are just patterns, oil on water catching sunlight. But as you continue, as your breathing slows and your visual focus softens, something begins to shift. The patterns start seeming less random, more intentional. You begin seeing shapes more clearly. A canoe, definitely a canoe, sailing across the water's surface toward what? An island, a cloud. The shape dissolves before you can be certain. Don't chase it, Kaimana murmurs. Let it come to you. Your mind wants to grab, to interpret, to understand. Resist that urge, just witness, just allow. Minutes pass, 5, 10, and you're entering a state you can't quite describe. Not asleep, definitely not asleep, but not entirely present either. Your body is here on the beach, but your attention is somewhere else, drifting in the space between the bowl's physical reality and the meanings your mind creates from its patterns. You see more shapes now, forming and dissolving. Fish, birds, human faces, geometric designs. Some seem random, others feel intentional, like they're being shown to you rather than accidentally appearing. And you'll never be quite certain this actually happened, or if it's your imagination supplying what you expect. The patterns form into something specific. A path made of moonlight stretching across dark water and figures walking along it, translucent and glowing, moving in single file toward a destination you can't see. The night marchers, your mind supplies, though you have no rational reason to make that identification. The vision lasts maybe 3 seconds before dissolving, and you're not sure whether to trust it, but Kaimana is nodding as if she saw something too, or as if she recognizes from your expression that you experienced something significant. Good, she says simply. You're not blocked, not trapped entirely in rational mind. That's a start. With practice, you could develop real skill, but practice takes time, requires living with the techniques daily, letting them reshape how you process reality. Most visitors don't stay long enough for that. They get glimpses enough to understand the system exists, but not enough to master it. She covers the bowl and the spell breaks. You're fully back in daylight now, the beach solid beneath you, the sounds of the village clear and present. Your rational mind reasserts itself, offering explanations. You were probably experiencing a light trance state induced by visual fixation and rhythmic breathing. The patterns you saw were pareidolia, the human tendency to find meaningful patterns in random information. And the specific vision of the night marchers was suggestion, your mind producing what Kaimana had just been describing. All of which might be true, probably is true, at least in the sense that those explanations are valid from a Western psychological framework. But you're learning that truth can be layered, that something can be simultaneously a psychological phenomenon and a legitimate spiritual experience, that the mechanism and the meaning don't cancel each other out. Tonight, Kaimana says, if you're willing, we'll do a more intensive session. Full moon is 3 days away, but tonight the moon is strong enough for what I want to show you. We'll work after midnight when the village is asleep and the conditions are optimal. You'll need to rest this afternoon, conserve your energy. Dream work is more exhausting than people expect. You're not just lying there, you're navigating, making choices, maintaining awareness in a state where most people simply lose consciousness. It requires stamina. The rest of the day passes in a blur of ordinary activities that feel strange and slightly unreal after the morning's intense instruction. You help with fishing, learning to read the lagoon's patterns, identifying likely spots where fish congregate based on bottom composition and current flow. You assist with food preparation, learning which reef plants are edible, how to prepare taro to remove its natural toxins, the proper prayers to say before taking life from the ocean. Everyone you interact with seems to exist in two modes simultaneously, fully present in physical tasks while also maintaining awareness of invisible connections, spiritual dimensions, ancestral presences. It's not that they're constantly talking about spirits and dreams. They're not. It's more subtle than that, a quality of attention, a way of treating the world as alive and communicative rather than inert and mechanical. Mid-afternoon, Kainoa suggests you rest, and you return to the house where you slept, lying on the mat with the window open, trade winds flowing through the space, keeping it cooler than you'd expect. You don't intend to actually sleep. The day still feels too bright, too active, but the next thing you're aware of is Kainoa gently shaking your shoulder. The light outside shifted to late afternoon gold, several hours clearly having passed. "You slept hard," he says with amusement. "Good, you needed it. Come, there's food, and then Kaimana wants to prepare you for tonight's work." Evening finds you back at the Mary, but the atmosphere is completely different from last night. No crowd, no ceremony, no communal gathering. Just you, Kaimana, and one other woman, younger, perhaps 30, with tattoos marking her as another priestess in training. The three of you sit on the stone platform as the sun sets and the first stars emerge. Kaimana has brought more tools, several wooden bowls of different sizes, each with its own carved patterns, bundles of dried herbs that she burns in a small clay vessel, the smoke sharp and resinous, wooden implements whose purposes aren't immediately clear. She arranges everything with careful precision, creating what looks like an altar or working space. "Tonight," she says, "we're going to attempt guided dreaming. Not just observing what dreams come naturally, but actively directing your consciousness towards specific destinations. It's advanced work, probably too advanced for someone with your limited preparation, but the full moon is approaching, and that creates a window of opportunity that won't come again for a month. If you're willing to try, I'm willing to guide." The other priestess, her name is Nalani, you learn, explains the process. You'll drink a preparation made from specific plants, nothing hallucinogenic but something that affects sleep architecture, making it easier to maintain awareness during dreaming. Then you'll lie down here on the Mary, with Kaimana and Nalani maintaining a chanting vigil, their voices serving as anchors, keeping your consciousness from drifting too far into unconsciousness or fragmenting into meaningless dream chaos. "The goal," Nalani continues, "is for you to experience a voyaging dream, to have your awareness travel from your body here to a specific location we'll designate. It might not work, probably won't work fully on the first attempt, but you might get fragments, glimpses, enough to understand what we're describing when we talk about dream navigation." She's matter-of-fact about this, describing consciousness leaving the body and traveling to distant locations as casually as you might describe checking the weather forecast. And maybe that's the key. For them, this isn't exotic or supernatural, just another skill, another technique, part of the toolkit for living effectively in their environment. You agree because at this point, refusal seems more frightening than participation. You've come this far, learned this much, and turning back now would feel like a failure of nerve. So when Kaimana offers you a small wooden cup containing dark liquid that tastes bitter and slightly numbing, you drink it without hesitation. The effects aren't immediate or dramatic. No instant consciousness shift, no visual distortions. Just a gradual sense of your body becoming heavier, more distant, like you're settling deeper into it while simultaneously becoming less attached to it. Your thoughts slow down, become less verbal and more imagistic. The boundary between yourself and the environment softens. You can feel the stone platform beneath you, but also you are the stone, ancient and patient, holding the memory of thousands of ceremonies. Kaimana and Nalani begin chanting, their voices weaving together in complex harmony, rising and falling in patterns that seem to match your heartbeat, your breathing, creating a sonic structure that feels supportive, like a net catching you as you fall deeper into whatever state you're entering. Let yourself drift, Kaimana's voice says, or maybe you just think it says, the distinction between hearing and imagining becoming unclear. But keep a thread of awareness. Don't lose yourself completely. You're going to travel, but you need to remember the journey, bring it back with you. The moon has risen now. You're aware of this without opening your eyes, sensing her presence as light filtering through your closed lids, as a pull on your attention, a gentle insistence. And then you're moving, or something is moving, or movement is happening without a clear subject performing it. You're above the mare, looking down at three bodies on the stone platform, two women sitting and chanting, one person you, lying still. And then you're higher, the island shrinking below you, the lagoon visible as a perfect oval of lighter water surrounded by reef, the ocean beyond it dark and vast. The moon is huge, impossibly close, her face clear enough to see individual craters, maria, ray systems spreading from impact sites. You're moving toward her, or she's pulling you upward, and there's no fear. This should be terrifying, consciousness separating from body, floating into space. But it feels natural, right, like returning home after a long absence. The moon fills your vision, and you can see her surface in detail that no human eye should perceive from Earth. The sharp edges of recent craters, the smooth flows of ancient lava, the chaotic terrain where early bombardment left everything fractured and jumbled. And there are others here. You sense rather than see them, other dreamers, other consciousnesses that have traveled to this place, meeting in the moon's presence like pilgrims gathering at a sacred site. They acknowledge you without words, without form, just a sense of recognition, of welcome, of shared purpose. The moon speaks, except she doesn't speak, doesn't have a voice, just a presence that communicates directly into your awareness. You are small and vast, temporary and eternal, alone and connected. You live in a universe of tides, physical tides that move oceans, emotional tides that move hearts, spiritual tides that move souls. To resist the tides is to exhaust yourself fighting the inevitable. To ride the tides is to find power you didn't know you possessed. It's not wisdom in the sense of new information. It's recognition, remembering something you already knew but had forgotten, something every human knows at some deep level but most lose access to under the noise of modern living. The tides, the cyclical nature of existence, the rise and fall of everything, the patterns that repeat across all scales from atomic to cosmic. You're part of those patterns, not separate from them, and accepting that isn't resignation but liberation. The vision shifts, and now you're traveling back down, but not directly to your body. You're being shown something, guided through the space above the ocean, following a path of moonlight that stretches across the water's surface like a glowing road. Below, you can see them, the night marchers, processing along an underwater ridge, their torches burning impossibly under the sea, their drums beating in rhythm with your heart. They're not ghosts, not spirits in the sense of dead humans persisting, but something else, memories made solid, history that refuses to dissolve, cultural identity given form through collective belief and ritual repetition. They sense you, their attention turning upward, acknowledging your presence. There's no threat, no danger, just recognition. You're dreaming, traveling as dreamers do, and they respect that, allow it, even honor it. One of them, impossible to see clearly, more a suggestion of form than an actual figure, raises a torch in what might be greeting or might be warning or might be both. You are witnessed. You are permitted. Remember what you see. Tell those who sent you that the old paths remain open. The old ways still function. The old knowledge still lives for those willing to seek it. And then you're descending further, faster now, the ocean rising to meet you, and you plunge through its surface without splash or impact, sinking into dark water that somehow isn't dark at all but illuminated by moonlight penetrating impossibly deep, turning everything silver and blue and dreamlike. Fish swim past you, huge ones, whale-sized, but they're gentle, curious, nudging you with their noses like dolphins greeting a swimmer. You pass through layers of water, each one a different world. The sunlit zone where life is abundant and frantic. The twilight zone where darkness begins and strange creatures hunt with bioluminescence. The midnight zone where pressure should crush you, but doesn't because you're not really here. Not in body, just consciousness wearing the dream memory of having a body. And at the very bottom, in sediments that haven't been disturbed since the island formed, you see something. Carvings, structures, evidence of human presence at depths that should be impossible, suggesting that sea levels have changed, that islands have risen and fallen, that the ocean's relationship with the land has shifted dramatically over the time frames humans have inhabited these islands. It's too much information, coming too fast, and you feel your attention fragmenting, your ability to maintain coherent awareness dissolving. The thread Kaimana warned you to hold is slipping, and you're in danger of falling into true unconsciousness, losing everything you've experienced. But the chanting reaches you, the voices of the priestesses serving as lifeline, pulling you back up through the layers of dream, through the ocean's depths, through the sky, back to your body lying on stone under the moon. And you're gasping, sucking air like you've been underwater, your body rigid with effort, sweat covering your skin despite the cool night breeze. Kaimana's hand is on your forehead, cool and steady. Breathe, she says. Just breathe, you're back, you're safe. You traveled well, went deeper than I expected, but you came back. That's what matters. You lie there for a long time, breathing, grounding yourself in physical sensation. The hard stone beneath you, the wind on your skin, the women's presence beside you. Gradually, your heart rate slows, your breathing normalizes, and you can sit up, though your head spins with the movement. Tell us, Nalani says gently. Before the memory fades, tell us what you saw. And you do, haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency as the narrative helps structure the experience, makes it more coherent than the confused flood it felt like during the journey. You describe the moon, the other dreamers, the message about tides. You describe the night marchers underwater, their acknowledgement, their torchbearers' greeting. You describe descending through the ocean's layers and seeing the impossible structures at the bottom. The women listen intently, occasionally nodding, sometimes exchanging glances that suggest what you're describing matches their own experiences or teachings. When you finish, Kaimana is silent for a long moment, her face unreadable in the moonlight. You dreamed true, she finally says. Not everything will be literally accurate. Dreams have their own way of representing reality, but the core is genuine. The night marchers did acknowledge you, that's clear. The message about tides is valid teaching, probably meant for you specifically, addressing something you needed to hear. The structures at the bottom. She pauses, considering. That's interesting. We have traditions about older settlements, islands that existed before current ones, lands that were swallowed by the sea when ocean levels rose after the last ice age. You saw evidence of that, or your dreaming mind created appropriate symbols to represent that knowledge. Either way, you touched something real. She sounds pleased, almost proud, and you realize this was a test of sorts, a way of evaluating whether you were genuinely open to these experiences or just intellectually curious but emotionally defended against them. Apparently you passed, or at least didn't fail completely. The rest of the night is gentler, the women asking questions about specific details, helping you process and integrate what you experienced. They explain that the first voyaging dream is often the most intense, that future attempts would be somewhat easier now that you've established the basic neural pathways or spiritual connections, or whatever mechanism actually enables the practice. Dawn approaches gradually, the sky lightening almost imperceptibly at first, stars fading one by one until only the brightest remain. The moon has set hours ago, disappeared beyond the western horizon, but her influence remains. You can feel it in the lingering sense of expanded consciousness, the way ordinary reality seems slightly thin, as if you could push through it into other layers if you knew the technique. Kaimana sends Nalani to fetch food, and the younger priestess returns with fruits, fish wrapped in leaves and baked over coals, coconut water that tastes impossibly sweet and refreshing. You eat slowly, your body grateful for the sustenance, grounding itself through the simple act of consuming physical nourishment. The food tastes different somehow, more vivid, more present, each flavor distinct and somehow significant. The veil is thin for you now, Kaimana observes, watching you eat. It will remain thin for several days, maybe longer. You'll notice things you didn't before, synchronicities, patterns, connections between seemingly unrelated events. Your dreams will be more vivid, more memorable. Some people find this unsettling, the way reality becomes more fluid, less fixed. Others find it liberating. Either response is valid. She's describing something you're already beginning to feel, a sense that the world is more alive, more communicative than you'd previously believed. The wind rustling through the palm fronds seems to carry messages. The pattern of waves on the lagoon's surface appears meaningful, like text written in a language you're just learning to read. Even the birds circling overhead seem to be flying in formations that encode information for those trained to interpret them. This is how we live, Nalani says quietly, settling beside you with her own food. Always in multiple worlds simultaneously, the physical and the spiritual, the visible and the invisible, the individual and the collective. Western culture teaches separation, boundaries, discrete categories. We teach connection, overlap, the way everything bleeds into everything else. Neither approach is wrong, but they produce very different ways of experiencing existence. The sun breaks the horizon, and the world floods with light, warm, golden, reassuring. The strange intensity of the night begins fading, the boundaries becoming more solid again, consensus reality reasserting itself. You feel relief and also loss, grateful for the return to familiar ground but sad to leave the expanded state where everything felt possible, where consciousness wasn't confined to your skull but could travel, could touch other minds and distant places. The integration period is crucial, Kaimana says, her tone shifting to something more practical, more instructional. What you experienced last night, that needs to be incorporated into your waking understanding, not dismissed as just a dream or explained away as biochemical phenomena. The content matters. The message about tides, about surrender and flow rather than resistance, that was meant for you specifically. How will you apply it? How will it change how you move through your life? It's a good question, and you don't have an immediate answer. The experience was profound, but translating profound experiences into practical life changes is notoriously difficult. Still, something has shifted. You can feel it, a loosening of rigid certainty, a willingness to consider that your culture's consensus about reality might be narrow, might be missing entire dimensions of existence that other cultures access routinely. The night marchers, you say, returning to something that struck you as particularly significant. They acknowledged me, recognized the dreaming, but they're spirits of warriors, right? Ancient chiefs and fighters. Why would they be supportive of dreamers rather than, I don't know, aggressive or territorial? Kaimoa, who has appeared silently during your meal, answers this. Because warriors and navigators and dreamers are all doing the same work, protecting the culture, maintaining its continuity, ensuring knowledge survives across generations. The night marchers aren't random ghosts haunting people for entertainment. They're guardians, walking the old sacred paths to keep them alive, to remind each generation that the ancestors are still present, still invested in the community's survival and flourishing. A dreamer who travels with proper preparation, with proper respect, with proper purpose. They recognize that person as doing warrior's work in a different form. He sits with you, accepting food from Nalani, and the four of you eat together as the village around you begins waking, children emerging, fires being stoked, the daily routine resuming. There's something grounding about this. The way profound spiritual experiences exist alongside and integrated with ordinary human activities. Eating, working, raising children, maintaining shelter. The sacred and mundane aren't separated but woven together, each supporting and giving meaning to the other. I want to show you something, Kainoa says after a while. A place on the island where the moon's influence is particularly strong, where even skeptics tend to have experiences they can't easily explain. It's a walk, maybe 2 hours through the interior, but worth it if you have the energy. You do somehow. Despite the sleepless night, despite the intensity of the dream journey, you feel alert, energized, operating on some reserve that ordinary rest doesn't quite access. The others seem to expect this, nodding as if it's normal to be supercharged after profound spiritual experiences. The walk begins along the beach but soon turns inland, following a path that's barely visible, more a suggestion worn into the vegetation than a clear trail. You climb gradually, moving from coastal zone into lower forest, the vegetation changing from salt-tolerant palms and pandanus to larger trees, some with massive buttress roots that create caves and hiding spaces beneath them. Birds call from the canopy, bright flashes of color moving between branches. The air is cooler here, shaded, thick with the smell of growing things and decomposition, and the rich volcanic soil that makes these islands so fertile. Kainoa moves with the confidence of someone who has walked this path countless times, occasionally pointing out plants and their uses. This one for medicine, that one for dye, another for cordage. Every plant has multiple applications. Nothing is just decoration, and the forest reveals itself not as wilderness but as a carefully managed resource, species selected and encouraged over generations to provide what humans need while maintaining ecosystem health. The place we're going, Kainoa says as you climb higher, beginning to breathe harder with the effort, is called Moonwater Pool. There's a spring that emerges from the mountain, flows a short distance, and collects in a pool before continuing down as a stream. The pool is perfectly circular, unnaturally so, like it was carved deliberately, though we have no stories of anyone creating it. The water is always the same temperature, always the same depth, and it reflects the moon with unusual clarity, better than you'd expect from moving water with a spring constantly feeding it. He pauses to let you catch your breath, and through gaps in the trees you can see the ocean below, the lagoon a brilliant blue against the darker water beyond the reef. The island's elevation provides perspective, lets you see patterns invisible from beach level, current flows creating color variations, the precise geometry of the reef structure, fishing boats moving in formations that suggest collective strategy. People go to Moonwater Pool for vision quests, Kainoa continues, for healing ceremonies, for major life transitions, adolescent initiations, grief processing after deaths, preparation before difficult voyages. Something about the place amplifies whatever internal process you're engaged in. You go in carrying questions and tend to leave with answers, or at least clarity about why the questions don't have simple answers. The forest grows denser as you climb, the trail narrower, requiring attention to avoid roots and low branches. You're high enough now that the temperature has dropped noticeably. The trade wind stronger, creating constant motion in the canopy overhead. The sound is like ocean waves, the wind in leaves mimicking the pattern of surf on reef, everything connected through rhythm and pattern. And then the forest opens and you're there. The pool is exactly as described, perfectly circular, perhaps 20 feet across. The water so clear and still it looks like polished glass despite the spring bubbling up at its center. The surrounding stones are dark volcanic rock, worn smooth by centuries of water and visitors, arranged in a way that seems too regular to be entirely natural but too organic to be obviously constructed. Trees lean over the water, their branches creating a partial canopy that filters sunlight into shifting patterns on the surface. The effect is immediate and undeniable, a sense of presence, of weight, of significance that has nothing to do with the physical beauty, though it is beautiful, and everything to do with something less tangible. This is a thin place, one of those locations where the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary feels permeable, where even dedicated skeptics might pause and wonder if there's more to reality than materialist philosophy allows. Kainoa gestures for you to approach the pool's edge, and you kneel on the smooth stones, looking into water so transparent you can see every detail of the bottom. Sand, small stones, the spring's opening where water wells up in continuous gentle pulses. Your reflection looks back at you, and it's disconcerting how clear it is, how the water's surface manages to be simultaneously perfectly reflective and perfectly transparent. At night, Kainoa says softly, when the moon is overhead, her reflection in this pool is so bright, so perfect. People have reported being able to read by it, to see colors in the darkness, to watch the moon's features with more detail than looking directly at the sky provides. And if you enter the water, which is allowed, encouraged even, the moonlight penetrates all the way to the bottom, surrounds you, and people report experiences, visions, encounters, communications from ancestors or spirits or their own deeper selves. The interpretations vary, but the experiences are consistent enough across different people, different cultures, different time periods that we treat this place as genuinely sacred, genuinely powerful. You can believe it. Even in daylight without the moon's presence, the place feels charged, expectant, like something is always about to happen. You trail your fingers in the water and it's cold, much colder than you expected given the tropical climate, but not unpleasantly so. Refreshing, clarifying, the temperature shock creating instant alertness. "May I?" you ask, gesturing to the pool, and Kainoa nods. "That's why we came, not just to show you but to let you experience it. The morning after a voyaging dream is an excellent time to visit Moonwater Pool. Your consciousness is already opened, receptive, and the pool tends to provide integration, helps you process what you experienced, understand how it fits into your larger life pattern. You remove your outer clothing and slip into the water, gasping slightly at the cold despite expecting it. The pool is deeper than it looks. You can stand with water reaching your chest, but the center where the spring emerges is beyond your depth. You move to that center, treading water, feeling the spring's current pushing upward, and the sensation is extraordinary, like being held, supported by the earth itself, buoyed by water emerging from deep places, carrying minerals and memories from the mountain's heart. You float on your back, arms outstretched, gazing up at the canopy with its filtered light and moving shadows. Birds call from invisible perches. The wind creates continuous background sound. And underneath everything, that spring's pulse, steady and eternal, the mountain's heartbeat made audible, made tangible through rising water. And then, and you're not imagining this, you're certain you're not, the quality of light changes. It's still daylight, the sun well above the horizon, but the light takes on a silvery quality, almost lunar, as if the pool itself is generating illumination rather than simply reflecting what's already present. The water around you begins glowing, faintly at first, then more intensely, bioluminescence or something like it, though these are freshwater springs far from the ocean and its glowing plankton. You're not afraid. You should be water glowing with no obvious source, light appearing where none should exist, but fear doesn't come. Instead, there's curiosity, wonder, and a deepening sense of rightness, of being exactly where you're supposed to be at exactly the right moment. The light consolidates, takes form, and you're seeing. What? Not with your eyes exactly, but with whatever mechanism let you see during last night's dream journey. Figures made of light or memory or something unnamed, gathered around the pool's edge, watching you with expressions that convey neither threat nor welcome but simply acknowledgement. The ancestors, maybe, or spirits of the place, or your own consciousness projecting meaningful forms into ambiguous stimuli. The mechanism matters less than the message, which comes wordlessly but clearly. You are witnessed. You are held. You are part of patterns larger and older than individual human lives. Your questions matter less than your willingness to live with uncertainty, to keep asking even when answers remain elusive. The vision, if that's what it is, lasts perhaps 30 seconds before dissolving, the light returning to normal daylight, the figures fading or perhaps simply your perception of them ending. But the feeling remains. Acceptance, support, a sense of being woven into something larger that will continue with or without your individual participation, but that nevertheless values your contribution, your presence, your attention. You swim to the pool's edge and climb out, water streaming from your body, suddenly cold in the air despite the tropical temperature. Kainoa offers you a cloth to dry with, woven from some plant fiber and worn soft with use, and you wrap it around yourself, shivering slightly but more from emotional intensity than actual cold. You saw something, he says. It's not a question. Yes, you confirm, not bothering to analyze or explain, trusting that he'll understand without detailed description. He nods, satisfied. Most people do. The pool is generous with its teachings, especially to those who come with genuine openness. What you saw, what you felt, that's yours to integrate, to carry forward. The pool doesn't give answers you can share at dinner parties. It gives experiences that change how you orient yourself in the world, how you understand your place in the pattern of things. The three of you sit on the stones surrounding the pool, drying in the filtered sunlight, saying little. Nalani has produced fruit from somewhere, mountain apples, their flesh crisp and impossibly juicy, and you eat in silence, the simple act of consuming food helping to ground you back in physical reality after the morning's intensity. Eventually, Kaimana speaks, her voice contemplative. The moon's work is like this pool, drawing things up from depth, making visible what's usually hidden, providing reflection that shows you yourself more clearly than ordinary mirrors can. The dream work, the tide reading, the navigation by stars and waves, all of it is about developing the ability to perceive what's always present but usually overlooked. The moon doesn't create new realities. She illuminates existing ones, reveals what's there once you learn to see differently. She's right, you realize. Everything you've learned over these past 2 days hasn't been acquisition of new information so much as development of new perceptual abilities, new ways of organizing experience, new frameworks for understanding what was always there, but previously invisible or dismissed as irrelevant. In 3 days, Kamana continues, the moon will be full. That night we perform the largest ceremony of the month, the full moon gathering where the entire community comes together to honor her brightness, to perform rituals that can only be done in maximum lunar light, to receive teachings that come specifically during the full phase. I'd like you to participate, not as observer but as initiate. You've gone far enough into the training that surface-level witnessing would be insufficient. Either commit more deeply or step back entirely. Half participation isn't appropriate for what we'll be doing. It's a challenge and an invitation simultaneously, asking you to choose. Maintain comfortable distance and limit your involvement, or cross further into genuine participation with all the vulnerability and uncertainty that entails. The safe choice is obvious. Thank them for what you've learned. Attend the ceremony as respectful observer. Maintain your ontological categories and explanatory frameworks. The dangerous choice is equally obvious. Say yes, commit. Allow yourself to be changed by experiences you can't control or predict or easily explain to people back home who operate in entirely different reality tunnels. Yes, you hear yourself say before conscious deliberation occurs. I'll participate fully. Whatever that means, whatever's required, I'm willing. Kaimana's face doesn't change expression, but something in her eyes softens. Approval or maybe relief that you're not going to waste the opportunity by playing it safe. Good, she says simply. Then we have 3 days to prepare you. There are purification protocols, specific chants you'll need to learn, behaviors to avoid, foods to abstain from. It's not arbitrary tradition. Each element serves a purpose, helps create the internal and external conditions for the work we'll be doing. She begins explaining the requirements, and it's surprisingly demanding. You'll need to fast from sunset to sunrise each day, spend at least 2 hours in salt water daily, abstain from certain common activities. She's vague about which ones, saying you'll understand when tempted, and most significantly, maintain intentional awareness of the moon's presence. This last requirement is harder than it sounds. Actually tracking the moon's position throughout the day even when she's invisible in daylight, visualizing her location, feeling her pull, keeping a thread of attention focused on her presence the way you might maintain background awareness of your breathing. The point, Nalani explains, is to shift from treating the moon as external object to experiencing her as relationship. She's always there, always pulling, always influencing. Most people just don't notice. These 3 days are about developing continuous noticing, making the relationship conscious and intentional rather than unconscious and automatic. The descent from Moonwater Pool is easier physically but harder mentally. You're tired now. The accumulated effect of no sleep and intense experiences catching up with you. Your thoughts feel scattered, unfocused, and you're grateful for Kainoa's steady presence ahead of you on the trail, giving you something to follow, a physical anchor while your mental state drifts. Back at the village, afternoon is well advanced, and the heat has peaked, that time of day when sensible people rest in shade and wait for the relative cool of evening. Kainoa directs you to your sleeping space, and you collapse onto the mat, intending to just lie down for a few minutes but immediately falling into deep, dreamless sleep, your body claiming the rest it desperately needs. When you wake, it's early evening, the light golden and slanting, and you feel better, still tired but functional, no longer operating on pure adrenaline and spiritual momentum. Outside, someone is playing a flute, the melody simple and haunting, weaving through the sounds of evening. Birds settling for the night, voices talking softly, the ever-present ocean providing bass notes underneath everything. You emerge to find food waiting, fish stew, taro, fruit, and you eat hungrily, your body grateful for the nourishment. Kainoa joins you, and you eat together in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when words aren't necessary, when shared experience has created understanding that doesn't require constant verbal confirmation. Tomorrow, he says eventually, we'll work on the chants you need to learn. There are 3 specific ones: the moon greeting, the tide blessing, and the traveler's protection. They're in our language, which you don't speak, but that's actually not a problem. The words matter less than the intention, the rhythm, the willingness to participate in the vocal tradition. You'll learn them phonetically, and their meaning will come through use rather than translation. He explains that these chants serve multiple functions. Obviously, they're prayers or invocations in traditional terms, but they're also mnemonic devices encoding specific knowledge, and they're social bonds, ways of connecting with the community of practitioners across space and time. When you chant the moon greeting, you're joining your voice with every person who has ever chanted it, creating continuity, making yourself part of that lineage. It's beautiful when you think about it, Kainoa muses. These exact words, these exact melodies, have been passed voice to voice for how many generations? Hundreds, certainly, maybe thousands. Each person learning from someone older, practicing until it becomes automatic, then teaching someone younger. An unbroken chain of breath and sound, human consciousness expressing itself in patterns refined across centuries. Writing seems permanent, but it's actually fragile. Books burn, languages die, texts get misinterpreted. But this is genuinely permanent as long as there are people to practice it. The evening deepens into night, and the moon rises, later than yesterday, noticeably fuller, her face now showing only a small dark bite out of one edge. She climbs above the palms, flooding the world with silver light, and you find yourself tracking her almost unconsciously, maintaining that awareness Kaimana instructed, feeling her presence not just visually but almost physically, a weight or pressure or a tension that comes from above and slightly east, moving gradually westward as the night progresses. You wonder if this is real, this sensation of the moon's pull, this feeling that she's not just a physical object but also a presence, an entity, something that notices and responds, or if you're creating it through suggestion and expectation, imposing meaning onto neutral phenomena. But then you realize that distinction might not matter, that the subjective experience has validity regardless of its underlying mechanism, that if treating the moon as presence rather than object produces useful results, better navigation, clearer intuition, deeper connection to natural cycles, then the practice justifies itself pragmatically even if its metaphysics remain uncertain. The next 3 days unfold in a rhythm that's both demanding and strangely peaceful. Each morning begins with saltwater immersion, wading into the lagoon at dawn and floating there for 2 hours, maintaining awareness of your breath, your body, the moon's invisible daytime presence. The salt water is cleansing in ways both literal and metaphorical, drawing out toxins, softening boundaries, making your skin feel like less of a barrier and more of a membrane, interface rather than wall. After the salt bath, you work with Nalani and Kaimana on the chants, spending hours learning the pronunciation, the rhythm, the emotional quality that makes them more than just words. The moon greeting is gentle, welcoming, acknowledging her return each evening. The tide blessing is more formal, structured, containing within its verses a compressed tide table, lunar phase calendar, and set of instructions for reading wave patterns. The traveler's protection is haunting, almost sad, a request for safe passage that acknowledges danger without dwelling on it, asking for guidance while accepting that not all journeys end safely, and that's part of the contract, the price of movement and exploration. You practice until your throat is sore, until the chants begin infiltrating your dreams, until you find yourself unconsciously humming the melodies while doing other activities. And gradually, they stop being foreign sounds you're mechanically reproducing and start becoming something more integrated, more natural, expressions of understanding rather than just memorized sequences. The fasting is difficult, especially the first 2 nights when your body rebels against the missing food, your stomach cramping, your energy flagging. But by the 3rd day, something shifts. You enter a state of clarity, almost euphoria, where hunger becomes background noise rather than dominating sensation. Your thinking becomes sharper, more focused, and you understand this is part of why cultures worldwide use fasting as spiritual preparation. It changes your neurochemistry, makes you more receptive to non-ordinary states, breaks down the comfortable habits that normally filter experience into familiar categories. Throughout these days, you maintain lunar awareness, tracking the moon even when you can't see her, feeling where she is, noticing how her presence affects your mood, your energy, the community around you. And you're not imagining it, the correlation is clear. When she's in the eastern sky, even during daylight, you feel more energetic, more outward focused. When she's in the west, there's a drawing inward quality, more contemplative, more receptive. When she's directly overhead or directly underfoot, there's a sense of intensity, of forces aligning, of something significant occurring even if its nature remains unclear. On the evening of the full moon, the entire island feels different, charged, expectant, humming with an energy that might be objective or might be collective anticipation, creating a psychological field that feels real regardless of its physical basis. You've completed the 3 days of preparation, your body lean from fasting, your mind sharp and strange from the practices, your voice carrying the chants without conscious effort now, the melodies having worked their way into your nervous system through sheer repetition and ritual intention. The sun sets in its usual display of impossible colors, but tonight even that seems more intense, the reds deeper, the golds more luminous, as if the world is preparing itself for the moon's arrival by exhausting the palette of solar fire, clearing space for lunar silver. You gather with Kaimana and Nalani at the Mary as twilight deepens, joining perhaps 30 others who have arrived gradually, silently, arranging themselves in loose groupings that suggest social structure. Elders near the center, younger adults forming an outer ring, children allowed to observe from the periphery but not yet participate fully. Kainoa is there, and other navigators, men and women whose weathered faces and tattooed bodies mark them as people who have spent years in intimate conversation with the ocean. There are fishermen, their hands scarred and strong. There are farmers, smelling of earth and growing things. There are craftspeople whose fingers show the particular calluses of their trades, net weaving, carving, mat making. The whole community represented, united tonight in acknowledgement of the force that structures so much of their existence. The moon rises precisely as the last solar light fades, perfect timing, the kind of astronomical coincidence that happens monthly but never loses its impact. She's enormous on the horizon, that optical illusion of apparent size that makes rising moon seem close enough to touch, and her face is complete, unmarked by shadow, brilliant enough to cast sharp-edged shadows on the stone platform. The gathering releases a collective breath, not quite a sigh but an acknowledgement, recognition, greeting. Kaimana stands, moving to the center of the platform, and silence falls naturally, everyone's attention focusing on her. In the moonlight, her age seems to dissolve. She could be 30 or 300, ageless, archetypal, the priestess rather than just a priestess. She raises her arms, and her voice rings out in the moon greeting chant, the same one you've been practicing, and you join your voice with the others, feeling the power of collective vocalization, dozens of people breathing together, sounding together, creating harmony that's more than just musical, it's social, spiritual, a binding force that weaves individuals into community, separate voices into unified purpose. The chant continues for several minutes, repeating, building, and you feel something happening. Not supernatural in the sense of violating natural law, but certainly extraordinary. A shift in group consciousness where boundaries between individuals soften, where you're simultaneously yourself and part of something larger. The anthropologist in you recognizes this as communitas, the sense of undifferentiated togetherness that rituals worldwide can generate. But the part of you that's been opened by 3 days of preparation experiences it more directly, less analytically, as a dissolving of isolation, a return to connection that feels like coming home. The chant concludes, and in the silence that follows, the moon's presence seems even more pronounced, her light almost palpable, a substance rather than just absence of darkness. Kaimana begins speaking, her voice carrying across the platform without need for amplification, the stone and the night air somehow conducting her words clearly to everyone gathered. "We stand in the fullness," she says, using the present tense, making it immediate. "The moon has gathered all her light, shows us her complete face, holds nothing back. This is the time of revelation, of fullness, of maximum power. What was hidden during her darkness is now visible. What was growing in secret is now revealed. We honor her gift of illumination, her willingness to reflect the sun's fire and transform it into something gentler, something we can bear to look at directly." She pauses, and in that pause you can hear everything. The ocean's constant conversation with the reef, the wind moving through palm fronds, the breathing of 30 people synchronized through the chant they just completed. The sounds layer, creating complex harmonies, and you realize this is intentional, that the location was chosen partly for its acoustic properties. The way sound behaves here, bounces off the stones, creates patterns that enhance ritual effect. "Tonight," Kamana continues, "we perform the tide teaching, where those initiated into the mysteries demonstrate their knowledge for the community, and those seeking initiation present themselves for evaluation. We do this under full moon because her maximum light allows us to see most clearly, both literally and metaphorically. No shadows can hide incompetence or pretension. The light reveals everything." A young man steps forward. You recognize him from the village, perhaps 20 years old, strong from years of fishing and reef diving. He approaches Kaimana, bows slightly, and begins speaking in the local language, his voice steady despite obvious nervousness. Kaimana translates quietly for you, leaning close. He's requesting to be acknowledged as a tide reader, having completed 5 years of apprenticeship. He'll now demonstrate his knowledge, predicting specific tide conditions for the next lunar month, identifying optimal times for various activities, explaining his reasoning using the traditional framework. If he succeeds, he'll be recognized as competent, allowed to teach others, trusted with the responsibility of advising fishing expeditions and canoe launches. The young man produces a stick and begins drawing in the sand that's been spread on one section of the platform for exactly this purpose. He's creating diagrams, lunar phases, tide heights, correlations between them, while speaking continuously, explaining the relationships, demonstrating understanding. Other elders occasionally interrupt with questions, testing his knowledge, probing for gaps or confusion. He answers clearly, confidently, and you can see approval spreading through the gathering, people nodding, murmuring appreciation for how thoroughly he's mastered the material. The demonstration continues for perhaps 15 minutes before Kaimana raises her hand, indicating completion. She confers briefly with the other elders, then announces the verdict: accepted, recognized, welcomed into the community of tide readers. The young man's relief is visible, his shoulders dropping tension he's been carrying, and he's immediately surrounded by family members offering congratulations, the whole interaction having the quality of academic defense or professional certification, formal evaluation wrapped in ritual context. More demonstrations follow. A middle-aged woman showing her mastery of coral growth pattern analysis, explaining how to read environmental history from reef structure. An older man demonstrating advanced wave pattern recognition, feeling subtle differences in how water moves, and explaining what each variation indicates about current and depth and approaching weather. Each presentation is met with serious evaluation, questions, and ultimately either acceptance or gentle redirection toward further study. And then Kaimana is looking at you, gesturing you forward, and your heart accelerates because you hadn't realized you'd be asked to demonstrate anything, haven't prepared, don't have years of study to draw on like the others. But you remember her instruction, full participation or none at all, and you step forward, approaching the center of the platform, very aware of 30 pairs of eyes tracking your movement, evaluating, waiting. You've been with us only days, Kamana says, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. But you've completed intensive preparation, experienced voyaging dreams, visited Moonwater Pool, learned the chants, maintained lunar awareness through the preparation period. You're not seeking formal recognition. That would require years of additional training. But I ask you now to speak truthfully about what you've learned, how it's changed you, what you'll carry forward from this experience. It's not a test of technical knowledge, but of something deeper: authenticity, integration, the ability to articulate personal transformation. You take a breath, centering yourself, letting the moon's light fill your vision, her brightness almost overwhelming in your peripheral vision. I came here thinking I understood the moon, you begin, your voice steadier than you expected. I knew the facts, her size, her distance, her gravitational effects, her orbital mechanics. But facts aren't understanding. Facts are just the skeleton, and what you've taught me is the flesh, the lived experience of lunar relationship that transforms astronomy into wisdom. You pause, organizing thoughts that want to tumble out chaotically. I've learned that the moon isn't just an object in the sky, but a presence that structures time, that moves oceans, that influences everything with rhythm and cycle. I've learned that navigation isn't about conquering distance, but about understanding patterns well enough to move within them skillfully. I've learned that some knowledge can't be written down, can only be transmitted breath to breath, experience to experience, through living traditions that treat humans as part of nature rather than separate from it. The words are coming more easily now, and you're not sure if you're speaking your own thoughts or channeling something larger, the collective understanding of everyone gathered here, centuries of accumulated wisdom finding voice through you temporarily. I've learned that dreams aren't just random mental noise, but can be navigated, directed, used to access information that waking consciousness doesn't reach. I've learned that places can be sacred not because gods live there, but because they're thin spots where the ordinary and extraordinary touch, where transformation becomes possible for those willing to risk it. You meet Kaimana's eyes, and she's nodding slightly, encouraging you to continue. Most importantly, I've learned humility. My culture believes we've advanced beyond the need for traditions like yours, that technology makes ancient wisdom obsolete. But standing here under this moon, having experienced even a fraction of what you know, I understand that we haven't advanced beyond. We've just moved sideways, developing some capabilities while atrophying others. You can navigate thousands of miles of ocean by reading stars and waves. You can predict tides without computers. You can access dream states and altered consciousness without drugs. You maintain knowledge across generations without writing. These aren't primitive skills. They're sophisticated techniques my culture has largely lost and desperately needs to relearn. The gathering is silent, listening, and you finish with what feels most true. I don't know yet how to integrate what I've learned here with the life I'll return to. My world doesn't have space for moon priestesses or tide readers or dream navigators. But something has changed in me, permanently I think, and I'm grateful for it even though it complicates everything. You've shown me that reality is larger, more mysterious, more alive than my culture acknowledges. I can't unknown that now. I have to figure out how to live with expanded vision, in a world that insists on narrower sight. You stop, suddenly self-conscious, aware you've been speaking for several minutes, monopolizing attention in a ceremony that's not about you. But Kaimana is smiling, genuine warmth in her expression, and she gestures for you to return to your place in the circle. Well spoken, she announces. You understand the crucial thing, that this knowledge isn't about collecting facts but about changing how you exist in the world. Whether you use the specific techniques or not matters less than whether you maintain the relationship, the awareness that you're part of cycles larger than individual human life. That's what we're really teaching. Not tide tables and star charts, but humility, connection, participation in systems that preceded you and will continue after you're gone. The ceremony continues with more demonstrations, some successful, some requiring further refinement, all received with encouraging seriousness that makes clear this isn't just performance but genuine education. Community investment in maintaining skills everyone depends on. And throughout, the moon climbs higher, her light brightening as she rises further from the horizon's atmospheric distortion, until she's overhead, flooding the world with illumination so intense you can see colors. The green of palm fronds, the brown of earth, the varied skin tones of people gathered. At some unspoken signal, the formal demonstrations conclude, and the energy shifts from serious evaluation to something more celebratory. Food appears, more than you've seen before, clearly prepared for this occasion, dishes you haven't encountered yet. There's fish cooked a dozen different ways, fruits arranged in elaborate patterns, drinks made from fermented coconut or breadfruit or things you can't identify. People eat and talk. Children run between adults, the social structure loosening as ritual formality yields to communal feast. You find yourself sitting with Kainoa and several other navigators, listening to them trade stories of voyages, near disasters averted through skill and luck, islands found after weeks of searching, the challenges of maintaining traditional navigation in a modern world where GPS and engines make the old skills seem unnecessary. There's sadness in some stories, traditions being lost, young people choosing other paths, the possibility that this generation might be the last to practice full traditional navigation. But look at you, one old navigator says, gesturing at you with a piece of fish. You came from the modern world, brought all its assumptions, and still you learned, still you opened yourself. That gives me hope. Maybe the knowledge doesn't die. Maybe it just waits dormant until people are ready to receive it again. Seeds can wait centuries for the right conditions before sprouting. It's a generous interpretation, more optimistic than you feel warranted, but you appreciate the sentiment. And maybe he's right. Maybe cultural knowledge isn't as fragile as it seems. Maybe it can survive in fragments and pieces, waiting for moments when conditions allow its resurgence. The feast continues for hours, people eating and talking and eventually dancing, movement that's clearly stylized, telling stories through gesture and formation. You watch, learning the vocabulary. This gesture means ocean, that one means canoe, another means fishing, another navigation. It's a physical language, kinesthetic knowledge encoded in bodies, passed through imitation and practice. Yet another way of storing and transmitting cultural understanding that doesn't rely on text. Gradually, though, the crowd thins. Children are carried home sleeping, elders retire, and eventually only a core group remains. The priestesses, senior navigators, a few others who seem to have special roles in the community. Perhaps 15 people now, sitting in a tighter circle, the energy shifting again to something more intimate, more serious. Kaimana stands and announces, "We move now to the deep work. Those not initiated should leave respectfully, with gratitude for the celebration, but understanding that what follows is restricted teaching, not for all ears." Several people do leave, bowing slightly before departing. No apparent offense taken at the exclusion. You wonder if you should leave too. You're certainly not fully initiated. But Kaimana gestures for you to stay, and you remain curious and slightly anxious about what deep work means. Full moon, Kaimana begins once the others have gone, is the time when the veil between worlds is thinnest in one specific way, not for the dead, not for spirits, but for the future. The moon's fullness allows us to see ahead, to perceive events that haven't yet occurred but that are approaching with sufficient probability that they cast shadows backward in time, shadows that trained practitioners can read. She's describing prophecy, divination, precognition, concepts that make you uncomfortable because they seem to violate causality, suggest the future exists in some predetermined form waiting to be discovered. But you remember your commitment to participate, and you hold your skepticism lightly, allowing space for the possibility that she's describing something real even if your current conceptual framework can't accommodate it. We don't do this often, she continues. Maybe 4 times a year, during full moons that occur at particularly significant astronomical moments, equinoxes, solstices, lunar standstills. Tonight isn't one of those special times, but we do it anyway because we have a visitor, and the moon suggested we should share this teaching while we have the opportunity. The moon suggested. The phrasing makes the moon sound like an agent, an entity with preferences and communication capacity. You're about to ask what she means when Nalani begins preparing materials, more wooden bowls, water from specific sources she labels carefully, herbs burned to create different types of smoke, stones arranged in patterns that mirror constellations overhead. The technique, Nalani explains, involves entering a light trance state while maintaining visual focus on the moon's reflection in water. The reflection serves as doorway, interface between present moment and future possibility. What you see won't be literal, prophecy never is, but will be symbolic, metaphoric, requiring interpretation. We work collectively, sharing what we see, comparing visions, looking for patterns that emerge across multiple observers. That collective approach reduces individual bias, helps distinguish genuine signal from personal noise. The methodology sounds almost scientific: multiple observers, comparison of results, acknowledgement of interpretation difficulties. It's divination approached with some of the rigor of empirical investigation, and that makes it slightly more palatable to your skeptical mind. The process begins simply. Everyone positions themselves around the largest bowl, which has been filled with water and placed so the moon's reflection is centered perfectly on its surface. The moon's face looks back at you from the water, and you're struck by how much clearer, how much more detailed the reflection appears compared to looking directly at the sky. It's as if the water concentrates the light, amplifies the image, makes visible features you couldn't discern otherwise. Kaimana begins a low chant, different from the ones you've learned, more droning, more monotonous, designed to induce trance rather than celebrate or invoke. The others join gradually, creating layered sound that seems to vibrate through your chest, your bones, creating resonance that's physical as much as auditory. You add your voice uncertainly, following the pattern even though you don't know the words, and surprisingly it works. The unfamiliarity doesn't matter. The group sound carries you along, includes you in the collective vocalization. Your vision begins softening around the edges, periphery losing detail while the moon's reflection sharpens, becomes almost painfully bright and clear. You're aware of your breathing slowing, deepening, falling into rhythm with the chant, and the boundary between yourself and the others becomes permeable. Awareness diffusing outward while simultaneously focusing intensely on the reflected moon. Time becomes elastic, unreliable. You might stare at the reflection for minutes or hours, You have no way of knowing. And then images begin appearing, not replacing the moon but overlaying it. Translucent scenes playing across its surface like dreams projected onto reality. You see a canoe, but not the traditional double-hull designs you've been learning about. This is different, larger, made of materials you can't identify, moving faster than wind and paddle could propel it. You see it voyaging across vast ocean distances, carrying not just cargo but something else, something precious. Knowledge maybe, or people fleeing danger, or seeds being transported to ensure species survival. The image shifts and you see islands, but they're smaller than they should be, water higher than it is now, coastlines reconfigured, some landmasses entirely submerged. You see people adapting, building differently, living differently, their cultures transformed by necessity but maintaining connection to traditions even as material circumstances change radically. Another shift, and you see the moon herself, but she's different. Closer maybe, or just appearing larger, her influence on Earth more pronounced, tides more extreme, and humans learning to work with this rather than fight it, scheduling their entire civilization around lunar rhythms in ways that current culture doesn't. The visions continue, fragmentary, symbolic, resistant to clear interpretation but carrying emotional weight, urgency, loss, adaptation, continuity despite change. You're not sure if you're seeing actual future events or metaphoric representations of current trends, prophecy, or poetry, but the images feel significant, weighted with meaning even when that meaning remains obscure. Around you, others are murmuring, describing what they see, and there are overlaps. Everyone sees water rising, sees cultural adaptation, sees the moon's influence growing rather than diminishing. The collective nature of the visions suggests they're not purely individual projection, though exactly what they represent remains unclear. Gradually, Kaimana's chant changes pitch, rising, becoming more definite, and the trance begins lifting. The visions fade, the moon's reflection returning to just a reflection, beautiful but no longer serving as portal or interface. You blink, feeling like you're surfacing from deep water, returning to normal consciousness with slight disorientation. "We've seen," Kaimana announces quietly. "And what we've seen is both troubling and hopeful. The ocean rises, this we all perceive. Not sudden catastrophe, but gradual change, requiring adaptation, challenging but not impossible. And through it, we saw continuity, cultures surviving by maintaining connection to old wisdom, by remembering how to read the ocean, work with the moon, navigate using stars and waves. The specific skills we preserve here might be precisely what future generations need when technology fails or becomes unreliable." She's offering interpretation, framing the visions in ways that make narrative sense, and you're uncertain whether she's accurately reading what you all saw or imposing meaning retrospectively. But her interpretation feels right, fits the emotional tone of the experience, provides framework for understanding images that were too fragmentary to decode individually. "The moon shows us this now," she continues, "because change approaches. Not tomorrow, not next year, but within lifetimes represented here. Children present tonight will live through significant transformation. Our responsibility is maintaining knowledge, teaching the skills, preserving practices so they're available when needed. We're not just honoring tradition for its own sake, we're stewarding survival skills disguised as cultural heritage." It's a powerful reframe, repositioning traditional practices not as romantic preservation of the past, but as pragmatic preparation for the future. And given what you know about climate change, rising sea levels, the vulnerability of island communities, her interpretation has sobering plausibility. These people might indeed be maintaining exactly the skills their descendants will desperately need. The gathering breaks up shortly after, people dispersing quietly, carrying the weight of shared vision, the responsibility it implies. You walk with Kainoa down to the beach, both of you silent, processing, watching moonlight scatter across the lagoon's surface in patterns that seem, after tonight's work, potentially meaningful rather than just beautiful. Do you believe it? You finally ask. The prophecy, the visions, the idea that we saw actual futures rather than just our own fears and hopes projected onto ambiguous stimuli. Kainoa is quiet for a long moment, his face thoughtful in the moonlight. I believe, he says slowly, that something happens during those sessions that's different from ordinary consciousness, that produces insights not available through regular thinking. Whether that's accessing objective future information or activating some deep pattern recognition capacity in our brains that can extrapolate current trends better than conscious analysis. I don't know. Maybe both. Maybe the distinction isn't as important as what we do with the information. It's an admirably nuanced position, maintaining belief in the practice without requiring specific metaphysical commitments about mechanism. You can respect that, appreciate the epistemological humility it represents. What I know for certain, Kainoa continues, is that traditional navigation works. I can sail thousands of miles and arrive where I intended using only stars and waves and birds. That's not faith. That's demonstrated competence, replicated countless times across centuries. So when the same culture that developed navigation that works tells me they can see futures through moon gazing, I don't dismiss it just because my culture lacks explanatory framework for how it might function. I stay open, participate, evaluate results pragmatically rather than rejecting the practice, because it seems impossible. You walk in silence for a while longer, and the moon continues her patient arc across the sky, indifferent to human attempts at prophecy, at understanding, at finding meaning in her life. She simply is, following gravitational laws with absolute consistency, reflecting sunlight with no agenda, pulling tides without preference or purpose, existing in that perfect intersection of physical determinism and apparent mystery that makes her such an appropriate focus for spiritual practice. Back at your sleeping place, exhaustion finally catches up with you. 3 days of preparation, hours of ritual, the intensity of group trance and prophetic visioning, all crashing down at once. You lie on the mat and the moon is visible through the window, now past her zenith, beginning her descent toward the western horizon. Her light falls across your face, cool and silver, and you remember all the times you've casually glanced at the moon throughout your life, seeing her as decoration, as romantic symbol, never understanding the depth of relationship possible, the way she can become teacher, guide, partner in the project of learning to live skillfully on this water-covered planet. Sleep approaches, and your mind drifts through the past day's experiences. The canoe voyage reading waves and stars, Kamana teaching tide prediction through pool observation, the dream journey to the moon's surface and underwater with the night marchers, Moonwater Pool with its impossible clarity and luminous presences, tonight's ceremony with its demonstrations and feast and prophetic work. It's too much to integrate immediately, too dense with meaning and information and challenge to your existing worldview. It will take weeks, months, maybe years to fully process, to understand how these experiences reshape your understanding of what's real, what's possible, what it means to be human in relationship with natural systems. But some things are already clear. You'll never look at the moon the same way again. She's not just an object now, but a presence, a force, something that pulls at you not just gravitationally, but psychologically, spiritually, calling attention to cycles and rhythms you'd previously ignored. You'll pay attention to tides, to phases, to the way moonlight affects mood and energy. you'll remember that indigenous knowledge isn't primitive but sophisticated, not something to be preserved as museum artifact, but engaged as living wisdom with practical application. And you'll carry the chants, the three melodies learned through repetition, encoding within their rhythms and words entire systems of understanding about lunar cycles, tidal patterns, safe travel. Even if you never use them formally, they'll be there, available, connecting you to the lineage of practitioners, making you part of that chain of transmission even as peripheral participant. The moon continues her descent, and your breathing slows, and consciousness dissolves into sleep while moonlight continues flooding the world. Available to everyone who looks up, but truly seen, truly understood, truly engaged only by those who have learned to see differently. To read the light not just as illumination, but as communication, teaching, invitation into deeper relationship with the forces that structure existence. You dream, and in your dreams you're voyaging again. But this time you're both passenger and navigator, both observer and participant, sailing a canoe that's somehow also the moon itself, traveling paths that are simultaneously ocean currents and memory streams and potential futures, all flowing together, all navigable for those who have learned the techniques, who have developed the perception, who have submitted to the training that transforms casual viewing into genuine seeing. The dream continues through the night, complex and layered, and when you wake with the first light of dawn, you'll remember only fragments. A moon path stretching across dark water, ancestors walking along it with torches, their drums beating in rhythm with your heart, their voices chanting the same melodies you've learned, welcoming you into the long tradition of people who sail by stars, who read waves, who dream with purpose, who understand that the universe is not mechanical and dead but alive, communicative, responsive to attention and respect, and the kind of knowing that comes not from books, but from patient observation extended across generations. The moon sets just before dawn, disappearing below the western horizon, her work tonight complete, her presence withdrawing until her next rising, the eternal pattern continuing, day yielding to night yielding to day, light and darkness trading places. The rhythm so fundamental, so obvious, that it's easy to forget how profound it is, how everything depends on it, how human existence is structured by this simple fact. The planet spins, the moon orbits, the sun shines, and in the space between these movements, life emerges, consciousness awakens, and sometimes, if you're very fortunate, very open, very willing to set aside certainty and embrace mystery, you learn to hear what the rhythms are saying, learn to dance with them rather than against them, learn to find your place in the ancient pattern and recognize that you were always part of it, always held by it, always moving within systems larger and older and more patient than individual human lives, but that nevertheless value your presence, your attention, your willingness to participate in the eternal conversation between human consciousness and cosmic order. The final morning of your time on the island arrives with gentle insistence. Bird calls, cooking smoke, children's voices, the village waking into another day that's both ordinary and sacred, both mundane and meaningful, the dual nature of existence that you've learned to recognize here. Your departure canoe will leave at noon, catching the optimal tide and current conditions, carrying you back toward the modern world with its different rhythms, different priorities, different relationship with the natural forces that govern existence whether acknowledged or not. You emerge from your sleeping space to find Kaimana waiting, sitting cross-legged on the sand, her face calm and somehow both ancient and ageless. She gestures for you to sit beside her, and you do, watching the morning light strengthen on the lagoon's surface, turning the water from dark blue to turquoise to that luminous transparency that makes the bottom visible, every grain of sand distinct. "You're returning," she says without preamble, to a world that doesn't quite believe in what you've learned here, that will offer 1,000 explanations for why these experiences weren't real, weren't valid, weren't genuine insights into deeper reality. You'll face skepticism from others, and more challengingly, from yourself. Your rational mind will reassert itself, will demand evidence and proof and mechanisms that current science can validate. This is natural, expected part of the integration process. She's naming something you've already been feeling. The way ordinary consciousness is beginning to return, bringing with it doubt, analysis, the comfortable categories that make the world feel manageable and known. The strange, expanded states you've been inhabiting are fading like dreams in daylight, leaving you wondering if they were as significant as they felt in the moment. The question, Kaimana continues, is what you'll do with that doubt. You can use it to dismiss everything, return completely to your culture's dominant paradigm. Treat this as interesting anthropological experience, but ultimately not real, not true, not integrated into your actual understanding of reality. That's the safe path, the path that requires no courage, no change, no risk. She pauses, and her eyes hold yours, intense and challenging. Or you can hold the doubt and the experience simultaneously, refusing to collapse the tension between them. You can acknowledge that you don't have satisfying explanations for what happened while also refusing to dismiss the experiences as mere hallucination or cultural suggestion. You can maintain what philosophers call negative capability, the ability to remain in mystery and doubt without irritably reaching after fact and reason. That path is harder but more truthful, more honest to the actual complexity of existence. It's exactly what you needed to hear, permission to be uncertain, encouragement to resist the pressure to resolve ambiguity prematurely. You nod, grateful for her understanding, her recognition of the challenges you'll face. The moon's teaching, she says, shifting topics slightly, is ultimately about accepting cycles, embracing the fact that everything waxes and wanes, grows full and empties, appears and disappears and appears again. Your understanding will work the same way. Some days you'll remember clearly, feel connected to what you learned, experience the moon as presence rather than object. Other days you'll forget, dismiss it all as nonsense, operate entirely within the rationalist framework. Both phases are valid, part of the cycle. Don't judge yourself when the connection fades. It will return, just like the moon returns after her dark nights, just like the tide returns after its retreat. She reaches into the bag she's carrying and produces something wrapped in soft tapa cloth. A gift, she says, handing it to you. A reminder, a connection, something physical to anchor the immaterial experiences. You unwrap it carefully to find a small carving, a canoe, perhaps 6 inches long, beautifully detailed, with tiny figures representing navigator and crew. It's made from some dark wood, smooth from handling, and when you turn it in the morning light, you see it's been inlaid with shell fragments that catch the light, creating the impression of stars or moonlight on water. It was my teacher's, Kamana says quietly, and her teachers before her. 6 generations of moon priestesses have carried this canoe, used it as focusing object for meditation, as reminder that we're all voyagers, all navigating uncertain waters toward destinations we can't quite see but trust exist. Now I give it to you, not because you're becoming a priestess. You're not. That would require years more training and commitment you're not prepared to make. But because you touched something real here, learned something genuine, and you deserve a token that honors that. That gives you something concrete to hold when the memories become uncertain. The gift is overwhelming, far more than you deserve, but refusing would be insulting, so you accept it with both hands, holding the small canoe carefully, feeling its weight, its smoothness, its reality. Thank you, you manage, the words completely inadequate but all you have. I'll honor this, carry it forward, remember what it represents. Kaimana nods, satisfied, and then Kainoa is there, announcing that the canoe is prepared. The tide is approaching optimal conditions. It's time to go. The goodbye is surprisingly swift. No prolonged farewells, no dramatic emotional displays. Just brief embraces, murmured blessings in the local language, hands touching foreheads in the traditional gesture of respect and recognition. Nalani is there, and several others you've worked with. Their faces warm but not sad, treating your departure as natural transition rather than ending. The canoe pushes off from the beach, the crew working efficiently, and you're moving across the lagoon toward the channel through the reef. You look back at the island, the village, the mare on its platform visible among the palms, the mountain rising behind everything with Moonwater Pool hidden in its green embrace. People are watching from the beach, hands raised in farewell, and you raise your own hand in response, holding the gesture until the canoe enters the channel and the current grabs it, accelerating you forward, and you have to hold on. And the island drops behind, shrinking, becoming one green profile among many as you emerge into the open ocean. The voyage back passes in a kind of trance, you watching without quite participating as the crew works the canoe, making constant small adjustments, reading conditions you're only beginning to perceive. The sun climbs and crosses and descends. The ocean's color changes a dozen times with the changing light and depth. Birds appear and disappear. Other islands pass at distances that make them seem like clouds rather than land. And all the while you're holding the small carved canoe, turning it in your hands, studying its details. The way the hull curves just so, the way the crew figures lean into their work, the way the whole thing embodies both stasis and motion, simultaneously still object and dynamic process, physical artifact and metaphoric teaching. It's perfect, this gift, exactly what you needed without knowing you needed it. Something that bridges the worlds you're navigating between, solid enough to hold, meaningful enough to matter, beautiful enough to command attention even from those who don't understand its full significance. The sun is setting when familiar land appears ahead, the port where you began, the infrastructure of the modern world reasserting itself in concrete docks and metal boats, and the hum of engines and electricity. The transition is jarring, moving in hours from traditional navigation to this, from moon-governed rhythms to electric-lit schedules, from community built on millennia of shared practice to the atomized individualism of contemporary culture. The canoe docks and you step onto solid land, your legs uncertain after hours at sea, and Kainoa is there, steadying you with a hand on your elbow. "Go well," he says simply. "Remember what you've learned. Share it when appropriate, when you find people ready to hear. And know that you're always welcome to return, to continue learning, to deepen the training if you choose. The door is open. The tide will bring you back if that's your path." And then he's gone, returning to the canoe, pushing off, heading back toward the island that's already invisible in the gathering dusk. You stand on the dock watching until the canoe disappears entirely, merged with the darkening ocean, and then you turn toward the lights and noise. And familiar strangeness of the world you left only days ago, but that now feels foreign, uncomfortable, operating by rules you suddenly see as arbitrary rather than inevitable, constructed rather than natural. The days that follow are difficult, disorienting, the re-entry into ordinary life complicated by how much you've changed, and how little anyone else can perceive that change. You try explaining what you experienced, but the words sound absurd when spoken in coffee shops and offices, the profound experiences flattening into silly-sounding anecdotes about moon-gazing and dream travel and prophecy. People listen politely, maybe even with genuine interest, but you can see they're not understanding, not grasping the depth of what you encountered, treating it as exotic tourism rather than genuine transformation. So you stop trying to explain. You carry the carved canoe in your pocket, touching it occasionally like a talisman, a reminder that the experiences were real even when they feel increasingly dreamlike. You track the moon, noting her phases, feeling the pull of her presence even when buildings and light pollution obscure her face. You pay attention to tides, to rhythms, to the cycles that continue operating whether acknowledged or not. And slowly, gradually, you find ways to integrate what you learned with your ordinary life, not abandoning the modern world but supplementing it, adding layers of awareness and practice that make existence richer, more textured, more connected to the deep patterns that your culture typically ignores. You meditate at night when the moon is visible, practicing the techniques Kaimana taught for maintaining awareness, for bridging waking and dreaming states. You study the traditional knowledge systems, reading what you can, though you recognize that books capture only fragments of what's really oral tradition, embodied practice, lived relationship. Months pass, and the full moon returns, cycles through her phases, returns again. And each time she's full, you remember that ceremony, that gathering, the prophecy received, and the responsibility it implies. You think about rising seas and cultural adaptation, and the possibility that traditional knowledge preserved in small island communities might be precisely what future generations need when technology fails or environmental conditions change so dramatically that current systems can't cope. You don't know if that future will actually arrive, if the prophecy was accurate or just pattern recognition amplified by suggestion and expectation. But you know that the skills you glimpsed, the navigation, the tide reading, the dream work, the capacity to live in intimate relationship with natural rhythms, those are valuable regardless, worth preserving not because they're old but because they work, because they represent hard-won understanding about how to thrive on a water-covered planet with a massive moon creating constant tidal pulses. And sometimes, late at night when the moon is bright and you're alone with your thoughts, you take out the carved canoe and hold it, feeling the smooth wood, tracing the inlaid shell stars, remembering Kaimana's face in moonlight, Kainoa's voice teaching navigation, the taste of salt water at dawn, the sound of chanting voices creating collective trance, the vision of moon paths stretching across dark water with ancestors walking them with torches, their drums still beating, their invitation still extended to anyone willing to learn their language, to sail their routes, to maintain the knowledge for when it's needed again. The canoe reminds you that you're voyaging, always voyaging, navigating uncertain waters toward destinations you can't quite see but trust exist, guided by stars and waves, and the patient pull of the moon, carried by currents larger than individual will, but responsive to skilled reading and appropriate timing. You're part of that ancient pattern now, however peripherally, however briefly you touched it, woven into the tradition of people who understood that separation from nature is illusion, that humans are part of the planetary system not separate from it, that the moon's light illuminates not just the physical world but also the paths through it, the ways of moving that work with the grain of reality rather than against it. And as you drift toward sleep, the carved canoe still in your hand, the real moon visible through your window even in the city's light pollution, you feel connected, held, part of something that continues beyond individual understanding, something that will persist as long as the moon keeps rising, as long as tides keep flowing, as long as anyone anywhere looks up at that bright face in the darkness and wonders and asks, and opens themselves to learning what she has to teach about cycles and times, and the patient rhythms that structure all existence. Sleep comes gently, and you dream, and in your dreams you're sailing again. But the canoe is both the small carved one you're holding and a full-sized vessel carrying you across moonlit water toward islands that might be memory, or might be future, or might be that eternal now where all voyages exist simultaneously. All navigators sail together. All the accumulated wisdom of centuries glows like bioluminescence in the wake, marking paths for those who follow, inviting participation. Welcoming new voices into the ancient chorus of people who learned to read the world by reading the moon, who found their way across vast oceans by paying attention to what the universe was already saying, who understood that knowledge isn't about dominating nature, but about learning to speak its languages fluently enough to move through its domains with grace and skill, and appropriate respect for forces larger than any individual human, but that nevertheless value human presence, human attention, human willingness to be part of the pattern, rather than attempting to stand outside it. The moon shines on, patient and eternal, pulling at oceans, illuminating nights, marking time, teaching anyone willing to learn that wisdom isn't about having all the answers but about maintaining relationship with the questions. That navigation isn't about eliminating uncertainty, but about moving skillfully within it. That the deepest knowledge comes not from books or teachers, but from direct experience of the rhythms that govern existence, experienced with full presence, integrated with humility, carried forward with gratitude for those who maintained the teachings across the centuries, and with responsibility to those who will need them in times yet to come. Sweet dreams, Voyager. The tide carries you still, as it always has, as it always will. Trust the moon. Trust the patterns. Trust that the destination exists even when you can't see it yet, and that the journey itself, properly attended to, is teaching you everything you need to know.